The ocean depths hold secrets that even the most advanced technology cannot fully explain. Beneath the waves, where pressure crushes and darkness reigns eternal, mysteries unfold that challenge our understanding of what should be possible. Today, we're diving into 20 of the most baffling submarine disappearances and disasters in maritime history. Stories that will leave you questioning what we really know about the dangers lurking in the deep. From state-of-the-art nuclear vessels that vanished without explanation to rescue submarines that became trapped by invisible forces, these aren't just accidents. They're enigmas that have baffled investigators for decades, leaving behind more questions than answers. Some involve cutting-edge military technology, others wartime secrets, and many defy the very laws of physics and engineering that should have kept these vessels safe. So settle in as we descend into the unknown, where the line between mechanical failure and the unexplainable becomes impossibly thin. Our first story takes us to the North Atlantic, where one of America's most advanced submarines met a fate that still haunts the Navy to this day: the phantom implosion of the USS Thresher. April 10th, 1963. The waters off Cape Cod were calm, the sea stretching endlessly under a clear spring sky. Below the surface, at a depth where sunlight never penetrates, the USS Thresher was conducting what should have been a routine deep dive test. She was America's pride, a state-of-the-art nuclear submarine representing the pinnacle of naval engineering, equipped with the most advanced systems money could buy. But routine is a dangerous word in the deep ocean. The Thresher wasn't just any submarine. She was the lead vessel of her class, a technological marvel that embodied everything the U.S. Navy had learned about underwater warfare. Her nuclear reactor could propel her through the depths at speeds that would have been unimaginable just decades earlier. Her sonar systems could detect threats from miles away. Her hull was designed to withstand crushing pressures that would instantly destroy any surface vessel. Yet as the morning progressed, something went catastrophically wrong. At approximately 9:13 a.m., the rescue ship USS Skylark, monitoring the test from the surface, received a garbled transmission from the Thresher. The message was fragmented, broken by static, but the words that came through were chilling. Something about experiencing minor difficulties and attempting to blow. Then, at 9:17 a.m., a sound echoed through the hydrophones, a sound that no one aboard the Skylark would ever forget. It was the unmistakable noise of a submarine's hull imploding under tremendous pressure. The Thresher, along with all 129 souls aboard, had been crushed by the very ocean she was designed to conquer. But what caused this catastrophe remains one of the most haunting mysteries in naval history. The official investigation pointed to a piping failure, a seemingly minor leak that somehow cascaded into total disaster. The theory suggested that seawater flooding into the engine room caused electrical failures, which in turn prevented the submarine from surfacing. But this explanation raises more questions than it answers. How could a state-of-the-art nuclear submarine, equipped with multiple redundant safety systems, be brought down by a simple pipe failure? The Thresher's emergency ballast blow system should have been able to bring her to the surface, even with significant flooding. Her compartments were designed to contain damage. Her crew was among the most highly trained in the world. Yet none of these safeguards worked when they were needed most. More disturbing still is what the investigation revealed about the submarine's construction. Inconsistencies in maintenance records suggested that some welds may have been faulty, that critical inspections may have been rushed or overlooked. But if this was true, how had these flaws gone undetected in such a meticulously engineered vessel? The debris field, when finally located months later at a depth of 8,400 feet, told a story of catastrophic failure. The submarine had been torn apart by the implosion, scattered across the ocean floor in pieces that painted a picture of unimaginable violence. But even this physical evidence couldn't definitively explain why the Thresher had descended past her crushed depth in the first place. Some theories point to human error. Perhaps a valve was opened when it should have been closed, or a critical system was shut down at the wrong moment. Others suggest design flaws that weren't apparent until it was too late. But perhaps the most unsettling possibility is that the Thresher encountered something in the depths that her designers never anticipated, a combination of factors so unlikely, so perfectly destructive, that it couldn't have been predicted. The silence from the submarine, in her final moments, adds another layer of mystery. Modern submarines are equipped with multiple communication systems, emergency beacons, and distress signals. Yet the Thresher managed only that one garbled transmission before disappearing forever. What happened in those final minutes that prevented any further communication? The tragedy sent shockwaves through the Navy and led to the implementation of the SubSafe program, a comprehensive safety protocol designed to prevent such disasters. But the program's very existence serves as a reminder that the ocean is an unforgiving environment where even the smallest oversight can have catastrophic consequences. Today, the Thresher rests on the ocean floor, a tomb for 129 brave sailors and a testament to the sea's power to humble even our most advanced technology. Her loss remains a sobering reminder that despite all our engineering prowess, the deep ocean keeps its own rules, rules that we violate at our peril. The mystery of what exactly went wrong aboard the Thresher that April morning continues to haunt submarine designers and naval officers. Was it a cascade of mechanical failures, human error, or something else entirely? The answer, like the submarine herself, remains buried in the depths, waiting for someone to uncover the truth. If stories like this fascinate you, as much as they do me, I'd love to have you join our growing community of mystery enthusiasts. Hit that subscribe button to dive deeper into the ocean's most perplexing enigmas. Trust me, we're just getting started, and the mysteries ahead will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the deep. Story 2. The HMS Affray vanishing. From the crushing depths where the Thresher met her fate, we turn to another submarine mystery that unfolded in the choppy waters of the English Channel. This time, it's not the vast Atlantic that claimed a vessel, but the busy shipping lanes of one of the world's most traveled waterways, a place where help should have been minutes away, where rescue should have been possible, where no submarine should simply vanish without a trace. Yet that's exactly what happened to HMS Affray, a British submarine that disappeared on what should have been a routine training exercise, leaving behind a mystery that would perplex investigators for decades. The Phantom of the Channel. April 16th, 1951. The English Channel was bustling with maritime traffic, merchant vessels, fishing boats, and naval craft crisscrossing the narrow stretch of water between Britain and France. It was a perfect day for submarine training, with moderate seas and clear visibility. HMS Affray, an Amphion-class submarine, slipped beneath the waves carrying 75 crew members on what was supposed to be a standard exercise. But in the underwater world, standard and safe are never guaranteed. HMS Affray wasn't a newcomer to these waters. Built during World War II, she had served with distinction throughout the conflict, surviving the deadliest submarine warfare in history. Her crew was experienced, her systems well-maintained, and her mission routine. She was conducting a training dive in familiar waters, the kind of exercise that submarines perform hundreds of times without incident. Yet somewhere beneath the channel's deceptively calm surface, something went catastrophically wrong. The first sign of trouble was what didn't happen. Affray failed to surface at the scheduled time. Initially, this wasn't cause for immediate alarm. Training exercises sometimes run over, equipment occasionally malfunctions, and submarines have backup systems precisely for these situations. But as hours passed without any communication, concern began to mount. The Royal Navy launched one of the most intensive submarine searches in British history. Ships and aircraft scoured the channel, their sonar probing the depths for any sign of the missing vessel. The search area was relatively small and well mapped, unlike the vast oceanic depths where other submarines had vanished. In these shallow, busy waters, finding a submarine should have been straightforward. It wasn't. Days turned into weeks as the search continued. The channel was turned inside out, every possible location examined and re-examined. The mystery deepened with each passing day. How could a large submarine simply disappear in one of the world's most heavily trafficked waterways? Where was the wreckage? Where were the debris fields that typically mark a submarine disaster? When HMS Affray was finally located months later, lying at a depth of 260 feet, she presented more questions than answers. The submarine was intact, resting on the seabed as if she had simply settled there peacefully. But the peace was deceptive. Inside, all 75 crew members had perished. The investigation revealed that the submarine's snorkel mast was damaged, suggesting that flooding had occurred. But this only deepened the mystery. The snorkel was a critical component, designed to allow the submarine to operate near the surface while maintaining a supply of fresh air. If it had failed, why couldn't the crew execute emergency procedures to surface? More puzzling still was the absence of any distress signal. HMS Affray was equipped with multiple communication systems, emergency beacons, and standard naval protocols for emergency situations. Her crew was trained to send distress signals at the first sign of serious trouble, yet no call for help was ever received. The Royal Navy's inquiry examined every possibility. Had there been a collision with a surface vessel? The channel was busy, but no ships reported any unusual incidents. Had there been an explosion? The wreck showed no signs of blast damage. Had there been a catastrophic system failure? The submarine's key systems appeared intact. Theories emerged, each more troubling than the last. Some suggested a collision with an underwater object, perhaps a wreck or debris that had damaged the snorkel. Others proposed a battery explosion, though no evidence supported this. The most unsettling theory was that something had gone wrong so quickly, so catastrophically, that the crew had no time to react or call for help. But what could incapacitate an entire submarine crew so rapidly? The investigation uncovered troubling details about the submarine's final moments. The crew had been conducting a routine training exercise, practicing the kind of maneuvers they had performed countless times before. There was no indication of any mechanical problems, no reports of unusual conditions, no reason to expect anything other than a successful exercise. Yet, something had gone wrong with such speed and finality that 75 experienced submariners were unable to save themselves or their vessel. The wreck itself offered few clues. The submarine's hull was intact, ruling out the kind of catastrophic implosion that had claimed other vessels. The control room showed no signs of panic or desperate attempts to surface. It was as if the crew had simply stopped. Some investigators proposed that the snorkel failure had led to a buildup of carbon dioxide or other toxic gases, incapacitating the crew before they could react. But this theory raised its own questions. Why had the air purification systems failed? Why had no one managed to reach the emergency controls? The loss of HMS Affray sent shockwaves through the Royal Navy and submarine forces worldwide. Here was a modern submarine, operating in familiar waters, with an experienced crew that had simply vanished without explanation. If it could happen to Affray, it could happen to any submarine, anywhere. The mystery has never been fully solved. The official cause was listed as flooding through the damaged snorkel, but this doesn't explain why the crew couldn't execute emergency procedures, why no distress signal was sent, or why the submarine couldn't surface despite being in relatively shallow water. Today, HMS Affray rests on the channel floor, a grave for 75 sailors and a reminder that even in the most familiar waters, the sea keeps its deadliest secrets. Her loss remains one of the most baffling submarine disasters in British naval history, a phantom vanishing that defied explanation and continues to haunt those who study submarine warfare. The mystery of HMS Affray forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth, that sometimes, despite all our technology and training, the ocean claims vessels and lives in ways we simply cannot understand. In the depths, where pressure and darkness rule, even the most routine operation can become a journey into the unknown. Story 3. The Ara San Juan Enigma. From the cold depths of the English Channel, our journey takes us to the vast expanse of the South Atlantic, where modern technology collides with ancient oceanic mysteries. This is the story of a submarine that disappeared in an age when satellites track every movement, when communication systems span the globe, when rescue should have been a matter of hours, not months. Yet the ARA San Juan vanished as completely as any vessel from the age of sail, leaving behind a mystery that challenges everything we thought we knew about modern submarine safety. The Silent Explosion. November 15th, 2017. The South Atlantic stretched endlessly under an overcast sky, its gray waters hiding depths that have claimed countless vessels throughout history. Far below the surface, the Argentine submarine Ara San Juan was making her way northward, carrying 44 crew members on what should have been a routine patrol mission. But in the ocean's embrace, routine is often a prelude to disaster. The San Juan was a modern diesel-electric submarine, a German-designed TR-1700 class vessel that had served the Argentine Navy for over 3 decades. She had recently undergone a major refit, her systems updated and her hull reinforced to extend her operational life. Her crew was experienced, her mission straightforward, a standard patrol in Argentina's territorial waters. Yet somewhere in those familiar waters, something went catastrophically wrong. The first indication of trouble came not from the submarine herself, but from the mysterious silence that followed her last transmission. On the morning of November 15th, the San Juan had reported a minor electrical issue. Seawater had entered through the snorkel, causing a short circuit in the forward battery compartment. The crew assured Naval Command that they had isolated the problem and were continuing their mission. Those were the last words ever heard from the ARA San Juan. When the submarine failed to check in at the scheduled time, concern began to mount. But submarines operate in a world where communication blackouts are common, where maintaining stealth sometimes requires complete radio silence. The initial reaction was cautious. The San Juan might simply be running behind schedule or dealing with minor technical issues. But as hours turned into days, it became clear that something far more serious had occurred. The Argentine Navy launched a massive search and rescue operation, eventually involving ships and aircraft from 18 countries. The international response was unprecedented. American deep-sea rescue vehicles, British naval vessels, Russian specialized equipment, all converging on the South Atlantic in a desperate attempt to locate the missing submarine. Yet the ocean kept it secret. Days into the search, a chilling discovery emerged. International monitoring stations had detected an unusual acoustic event near the San Juan's last known position, a sound consistent with an underwater explosion. The timing aligned perfectly with the submarine's disappearance, suggesting that whatever had happened to the San Juan had been sudden, violent, and final. But what could have caused such an explosion? The submarine's last transmission had mentioned only a minor electrical issue, nothing that should have led to catastrophe. The crew had seemed confident they could handle the problem. There was no indication of any imminent danger. The search continued for weeks, covering thousands of square miles of treacherous South Atlantic waters. Hope gradually faded as the reality set in. If the acoustic event had indeed been the San Juan's death knell, then the crew's survival time had long since expired. The search shifted from rescue to recovery, from hope to grim determination to find answers. When the wreckage was finally discovered in November 2018, more than a year after the submarine's disappearance, it painted a picture of catastrophic violence. The San Juan lay crushed and twisted on the ocean floor at a depth of 900 meters, her hull showing clear signs of implosion. The submarine had been destroyed by forces so powerful that her steel structure had been unable to withstand them. But the discovery of the wreck only deepened the mystery. What had caused the explosion that led to the implosion? The submarine's systems were modern and well-maintained. Her crew was experienced and properly trained. The electrical issue they had reported was minor and had been reportedly contained. Investigators proposed several theories, each more troubling than the last. The most likely explanation centered on the battery compartment where the electrical short had occurred. Modern submarine batteries contain highly volatile chemicals, and under certain conditions they can generate explosive gases. If hydrogen gas had accumulated in the confined space and been ignited by a spark, it could have triggered a devastating explosion. But this theory raised its own questions. Why had the crew's safety procedures failed to prevent such a buildup? Why had the ventilation systems been unable to clear the dangerous gases? And why had there been no warning of the impending disaster? Other theories suggested external factors: a collision with an uncharted object, a catastrophic structural failure, or even sabotage. But no evidence supported any of these explanations. The San Juan had been operating in familiar waters, far from any known hazards. Her hull had been recently inspected and reinforced. There was no indication of any external interference. Perhaps most disturbing of all was the speed with which the disaster had unfolded. The acoustic signature suggested that whatever had happened to the San Juan had occurred suddenly and without warning. The crew had no time to send a distress signal, no opportunity to execute emergency procedures, no chance to save themselves. The loss of the ARA San Juan sent shockwaves through the submarine community worldwide. Here was a modern submarine, equipped with state-of-the-art safety systems, that had been destroyed by forces that investigators still couldn't fully explain. The tragedy highlighted how even in an age of advanced technology, the ocean remains an environment where the slightest malfunction can escalate into catastrophe. The families of the 44 crew members faced not only the devastating loss of their loved ones, but also the agonizing uncertainty of not knowing exactly what had happened. The lack of clear answers made their grief even more difficult to bear, turning their tragedy into a haunting mystery. The San Juan's loss also raised uncomfortable questions about submarine safety protocols and maintenance standards. The Argentine Navy faced intense scrutiny over the submarine's condition and the adequacy of its safety systems. But even as investigations continued, the fundamental question remained unanswered. What exactly had gone wrong in those final moments? Today, the ARA San Juan rests on the South Atlantic seabed, a grave for 44 sailors and a reminder of the ocean's power to transform the routine into the catastrophic. Her loss stands as one of the most mysterious submarine disasters of the modern era, a tragedy that occurred under the watchful eyes of satellite surveillance and global communication networks, yet remains as enigmatic as any maritime mystery from the age of exploration. The silence that claimed the San Juan continues to echo through the depths, a reminder that even in our interconnected world, the ocean keeps its deadliest secrets. In the abyss where pressure reigns supreme and darkness is eternal, even the most advanced submarines are vulnerable to forces that we still struggle to understand. Story 4. The K2-19 Cold War Mystery. From the modern waters of the South Atlantic, we drift back through time to the height of the Cold War, where beneath the waves, a different kind of battle was being fought. This is a world where submarines carried nuclear missiles, where every encounter could spark global conflict, where the line between accident and act of war was razor thin. In these shadowy depths, where nations played deadly games of cat and mouse, the loss of a single submarine could change the course of history. This is the story of K2-19, a Soviet nuclear submarine that caught fire in international waters, carrying with her secrets that both superpowers would kill to protect or die to conceal. Fire in the depths. October 3rd, 1986. The waters off Bermuda were calm, their tropical blue surface betraying nothing of the tensions that lurked beneath. Far below, in the crushing darkness of the deep Atlantic, Soviet submarine K2-19 was conducting a routine patrol, her nuclear missiles ready to launch at a moment's notice. She was one of the most powerful weapons in the Soviet arsenal, a floating city of destruction capable of reducing entire nations to radioactive ash. But power and technology mean nothing when the ocean decides to claim its due. K2-19 was a Yankee-class ballistic missile submarine, a nuclear-powered Leviathan designed to strike fear into the hearts of North Atlantic Treaty Organization, also known as NATO, commanders. Her hull contained not only a nuclear reactor but also a full complement of submarine-launched ballistic missiles, each tipped with nuclear warheads. She was, quite literally, a floating nuclear arsenal prowling the ocean depths in service of the Soviet Union. On that October morning, routine turned to nightmare in a matter of minutes. The first sign of trouble was a leak in one of the missile silos, a seemingly minor issue that should have been easily contained. Soviet submarines were built to withstand the harshest conditions, their systems designed with multiple redundancies and safety protocols. A small leak shouldn't have posed any serious threat to such a massive, well-engineered vessel. But in the unforgiving environment of the deep ocean, small problems have a way of becoming catastrophic disasters. The leak quickly escalated into something far more serious. The volatile rocket fuel began to react with seawater, creating toxic gases and extreme heat. Within hours, the missile compartment was engulfed in flames that threatened not only the submarine's structural integrity but also her nuclear reactor. The crew found themselves fighting a battle against forces that could destroy them and potentially contaminate vast areas of the Atlantic Ocean. The fire spread with terrifying speed, filling the submarine with deadly smoke and fumes. The crew, trained for combat against enemy vessels, now faced an enemy that couldn't be defeated with torpedoes or missiles, the relentless chemistry of fire and water. As the situation deteriorated, it became clear that K2-19 was in mortal danger. But the mystery of what had caused the initial leak has never been satisfactorily explained. The Soviet Navy claimed that their submarine had been involved in a collision with the USS Augusta, an American attack submarine that had been shadowing K-219. According to the Soviets, this collision had damaged the missile silo, leading to the catastrophic leak. The accusation was explosive. If true, it would mean that an American submarine had directly caused a nuclear incident that threatened the lives of 120 Soviet sailors. The United States vehemently denied any collision. American naval officials insisted that while the USS Augusta had been in the area, no contact had occurred between the two submarines. They maintained that the Soviet submarines' problems were the result of internal mechanical failures, not external interference. Both sides produced evidence to support their claims, but neither could definitively prove what had actually happened in those crucial moments before the fire began. The truth remained buried beneath layers of Cold War secrecy and mutual suspicion. What makes the incident even more mysterious is the nature of the damage itself. The leak appeared to originate from a specific point in the missile silo, a location that could have been caused by either internal pressure or external impact. Without direct examination of the damaged area, which remained radioactive and inaccessible, investigators could only speculate about the true cause. As the fire raged aboard K-219, the crew faced an impossible choice. They could attempt to contain the blaze and save their submarine, risking their lives in the process. Or they could abandon ship, allowing a nuclear-armed submarine to sink in international waters. Either option carried enormous risks, not just for the crew but for global security. The submarine's nuclear reactor, heated by the fire and threatened by the spreading damage, posed an even greater danger. If the reactor were to suffer a catastrophic failure, it could create an underwater nuclear disaster, unlike anything the world had ever seen. The radioactive contamination could spread across ocean currents, affecting marine life and coastal communities for decades. 4 crew members died in the desperate battle to contain the fire and secure the reactor. Their sacrifice prevented what could have been a nuclear catastrophe, but their deaths added another layer of tragedy to an already mysterious incident. These sailors died not in combat against a foreign enemy, but in a battle against forces that no one fully understood. Despite the crew's heroic efforts, K-219 was doomed. The fire had caused too much damage, and the submarine was taking on water faster than her pumps could handle. The order was given to abandon ship, and the surviving crew members were evacuated to safety. But even as they escaped, the mystery of what had started the disaster remained unsolved. The submarine sank in deep water, taking with her not only nuclear missiles and reactor, but also the physical evidence that might have resolved the dispute between the superpowers. The wreck lies on the ocean floor, too deep and too radioactive for detailed examination, keeping its secrets buried in the abyss. In the years since the incident, declassified documents have revealed additional details about the events surrounding K-219's loss, but they have also raised new questions. Some Soviet reports suggest that there may have been design flaws in the missile system that made such leaks more likely. Other documents hint at maintenance issues that may have compromised the submarine's safety systems. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the K-219 incident is how quickly a routine patrol turned into a near catastrophe. The initial leak was reported as minor, something that should have been easily manageable. Yet within hours, it had escalated into a fire that threatened nuclear disaster. This rapid escalation defied expectations and safety protocols, suggesting that something fundamental had gone wrong. The loss of K-219 marked a turning point in Cold War submarine operations. Both superpowers were forced to confront the reality that their nuclear-armed submarines were vulnerable not only to enemy action but also to mechanical failures that could have global consequences. The incident highlighted the razor-thin margin between routine operations and catastrophic disaster in the nuclear age. Today, K-219 rests on the Atlantic seabed, her nuclear cargo sealed within her hull. The submarine has become an underwater monument to the risks of the Cold War arms race and a reminder of how close the world came to nuclear disaster. But the mystery of what caused her initial leak, whether it was a collision, mechanical failure, or something else entirely, remains unsolved. The truth about K-219 lies buried with the submarine herself, in depths too dangerous to explore. In the shadowy world of Cold War submarine warfare, where secrets were as valuable as nuclear warheads, some mysteries are destined to remain forever hidden in the deep. Story 5. The USS Cochino Arctic Explosion. From the nuclear tensions of the Cold War Atlantic, we venture into the icy realm of the Arctic Ocean, where the earliest chapters of underwater espionage were being written in frozen darkness. Here, beneath the polar ice cap, submarines prowled in waters so hostile that survival itself was a constant battle against the elements. This is the story of a mission so secret that its true purpose remained classified for decades, and of a submarine that paid the ultimate price for venturing into waters where few dared to go. In the Barents Sea, where Soviet nuclear submarines would later patrol with devastating firepower, an American submarine met a fate that defied explanation. The Barents Sea Mystery. August 26, 1949. The Barents Sea stretched endlessly under the pale Arctic sky, its waters frigid and unforgiving even in the brief summer. Pack ice drifted on the surface, while beneath, the depths held a cold so intense it could kill a man in minutes. It was here, in this desolate expanse, that USS Cochino was conducting one of the most dangerous missions of the early Cold War. But the enemy that claimed the Cochino wasn't Soviet, it was the submarine herself. USS Cochino was a Gato-class submarine, a veteran of World War II converted for the new kind of warfare that was emerging in the aftermath of global conflict. Her official mission was listed as training exercises, but the reality was far more complex and dangerous. The Cochino was conducting electronic espionage against Soviet naval installations, using cutting-edge technology to intercept communications and gather intelligence in waters that were nominally neutral, but practically hostile. The Arctic Ocean was no place for the faint of heart. Temperatures that could freeze exposed flesh in minutes, ice formations that could crush even the strongest hull, and weather patterns so unpredictable they could turn calm seas into death traps without warning. For the crew of the Cochino, this was a mission to the edge of the world, and beyond. On that August morning, routine monitoring suddenly turned to chaos. Deep within the submarine's hull, in the battery compartment that powered her electrical systems, something went catastrophically wrong. A massive explosion rocked the vessel, filling her compartments with acrid smoke and toxic fumes. The force was so violent, it ruptured bulkheads and sent shockwaves throughout the entire submarine. But what had caused the explosion remained a mystery that would baffle investigators for years. The official investigation pointed to a battery failure, a catastrophic malfunction of the electrical storage systems that powered the submarine's operations. Submarine batteries are filled with corrosive acids and generate explosive gases under certain conditions, making them one of the most dangerous components aboard any underwater vessel. Under the extreme conditions of the Arctic, where temperature variations could stress systems beyond their design limits, such failures were theoretically possible. But the Cochino's batteries had shown no signs of problems before the explosion. They had been recently inspected and were operating within normal parameters. The submarine's electrical systems were functioning properly, with no indication of the kind of overload or malfunction that might trigger such a catastrophic failure. More puzzling still was the speed and violence of the explosion. Battery failures, when they occur, typically involve a gradual buildup of gases followed by a relatively contained explosion. What happened aboard the Cochino was far more destructive, a blast so powerful it threatened the structural integrity of the entire submarine. This suggested forces at work beyond a simple electrical malfunction. The extreme Arctic conditions added another layer of complexity to the mystery. The cold could affect metal in unpredictable ways, making components brittle and prone to failure. The submarine's systems were operating at the very edge of their environmental tolerances, in conditions they were never designed to handle. Could the extreme cold have triggered a cascade of failures that led to the explosion? But temperature alone couldn't explain the violence of the blast. The Cochino had been operating in Arctic waters for weeks without incident. Her crew was experienced in cold weather operations, and her systems had been specifically modified for the harsh conditions. If environmental factors were to blame, why had the failure occurred so suddenly and without warning? As the crew fought to control the damage, they faced challenges that went far beyond the explosion itself. The Arctic Ocean is one of the most isolated places on Earth, hundreds of miles from the nearest rescue vessel. In these waters, a submarine in distress couldn't count on quick assistance. Survival depended entirely on the crew's ability to save themselves. The fire that followed the explosion created a nightmare scenario. In the confined space of a submarine, fire is one of the deadliest threats a crew can face. The smoke and toxic gases can spread through ventilation systems in minutes, making entire sections of the vessel uninhabitable. The crew of the Cochino found themselves fighting not only the fire, but also the very air they breathed. Despite their heroic efforts, it became clear that the submarine was doomed. The explosion had caused too much damage, and the fire was spreading faster than they could contain it. The decision was made to abandon ship, a desperate measure in waters where survival time could be measured in minutes. The crew's evacuation in Arctic conditions was itself a miracle of seamanship and courage. The nearby USS Tusk, another submarine conducting similar operations, responded to the Cochino's distress calls and managed to rescue most of the crew. But the operation came at a cost. Several sailors died in the frigid waters, victims of the very environment they had come to monitor. As the Cochino slipped beneath the Arctic waves, she took with her not only the lives of brave sailors, but also the secret equipment and intelligence she had gathered. The loss was devastating for the Navy's intelligence operations, but it also raised troubling questions about the safety of such missions in extreme environments. The investigation that followed was hampered by the remote location and the classified nature of the mission. Much of the evidence went down with the submarine, making it impossible to determine exactly what had triggered the explosion. The extreme conditions of the Arctic Ocean meant that detailed forensic analysis was impossible. The wreck was beyond the reach of any recovery technology available at the time. Theories about the cause of the explosion ranged from plausible to far-fetched. Some investigators suggested that the submarine's experimental electronic equipment might have created electrical interference that triggered the battery failure. Others proposed that the extreme magnetic conditions of the Arctic, so close to the magnetic North Pole, might have affected the submarine's electrical systems in unexpected ways. Perhaps the most unsettling theory was that the explosion had been caused by sabotage, either by Soviet agents who had discovered the submarine's true mission, or by defective equipment deliberately introduced to compromise American intelligence operations. But no evidence ever emerged to support such claims, leaving them in the realm of speculation. The loss of the Cochino had lasting implications for submarine operations in hostile environments. The Navy was forced to reconsider the risks of sending submarines into extreme conditions, especially when carrying sensitive equipment and conducting classified missions. New safety protocols were developed, and submarine designs were modified to better handle the stresses of Arctic operations. But the fundamental mystery of what caused the explosion remained unsolved. The Cochino had been a well-maintained submarine with an experienced crew, operating equipment that had been thoroughly tested. The explosion that claimed her seemed to come from nowhere, striking without warning in a way that defied the Navy's understanding of submarine safety. Today, the USS Cochino rests on the floor of the Barents Sea, her hull a tomb for the sailors who died in her final moments. The submarine has become a monument to the hidden costs of Cold War espionage and a reminder of the risks faced by those who ventured into the world's most dangerous waters in service of their country. The Arctic Ocean, with its crushing ice and bone-numbing cold, had claimed another vessel. But unlike other maritime disasters, the loss of the Cochino carries with it the weight of unanswered questions. What force had been powerful enough to tear apart a submarine designed to withstand the pressures of the deep? Why had systems that had operated flawlessly for months suddenly failed so catastrophically? The mystery of the Cochino's explosion continues to haunt submarine designers and naval historians. In an age when we're sending submarines to the deepest parts of the ocean and the most remote corners of the Earth, the lessons of the Cochino remain painfully relevant. Sometimes, the greatest enemy a submarine faces isn't a foreign navy or hostile waters. It's the unknown forces that lurk within the vessel itself, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. In the depths of the Barents Sea, where Soviet submarines would later patrol with nuclear weapons, the Cochino keeps her secrets. Her explosion remains one of the most mysterious submarine disasters of the Cold War era, a reminder that in the underwater world, the line between routine operation and catastrophic failure can be thinner than the ice that covers the Arctic Ocean. Story 6. The K-8 Dual Fire Anomaly. From the frozen wastes of the Arctic, we venture into the tempestuous waters of the Bay of Biscay, where the Atlantic Ocean meets the European continent, in a clash of currents and weather systems. Here, in waters that have witnessed centuries of naval warfare, a Soviet nuclear submarine would encounter an enemy that defied all logic and understanding. This is the story of an impossibility made real, a submarine that suffered simultaneous fires in separate compartments, an event so unlikely that it challenged the very foundations of submarine design and safety protocols. The impossible fire. April 12th, 1970. The Bay of Biscay churned under gray skies, its waters reflecting the tension that permeated the Cold War world. North Atlantic Treaty Organization naval exercises were underway, a massive display of Western military power designed to project strength and unity. Below the surface, Soviet submarines prowled like sharks, monitoring the exercises and gathering intelligence on their potential enemies. Among them was K-8, a November-class nuclear submarine carrying the hopes and fears of the Soviet Navy into the heart of Western operations. K-8 wasn't just any submarine. She was one of the Soviet Union's most advanced nuclear vessels, equipped with cutting-edge technology and armed with nuclear torpedoes. Her mission was to observe the NATO exercises while remaining undetected, a dangerous game of cat and mouse played out in the depths of the Atlantic. Her crew of 104 was among the most skilled in the Soviet fleet, trained to operate in the most challenging conditions. But on that April morning, training and technology would prove insufficient against forces that no one had anticipated. The first fire erupted without warning in the submarine's 8th compartment, where critical life support and power systems were housed. Within minutes, thick, acrid smoke began filling the compartment, threatening not only the immediate area but the entire submarine's ability to maintain life support. The crew responded with practiced efficiency, implementing firefighting procedures that had been drilled countless times. But as they battled the flames in the 8th compartment, the impossible happened. A second fire erupted simultaneously in compartment 7. The crew of K-8 found themselves facing a nightmare scenario that submarine designers had never seriously considered. 2 separate fires, burning simultaneously in different parts of the submarine, each requiring immediate attention and resources to contain. The odds of such an occurrence were so astronomical that no submarine had ever been designed to handle it. The dual fires created a cascade of failures that overwhelmed every safety system aboard the submarine. Smoke began filling multiple compartments, making it impossible for the crew to access critical systems. The submarine's ventilation systems, designed to contain localized fires, became pathways for smoke and toxic gases to spread throughout the vessel. Emergency lighting failed as electrical systems succumbed to the heat and smoke. What made the situation even more mysterious was the nature of the fires themselves. They had erupted in completely separate compartments with no apparent connection between them. There was no shared electrical system, no common fuel source, no obvious reason why both areas should spontaneously combust at the same moment. The fires seemed to have appeared from nowhere, as if the submarine itself had decided to self-destruct. The crew's battle against the fires was heroic but ultimately futile. Standard firefighting procedures assumed that fires would be localized, allowing crews to isolate the affected area while maintaining control of the rest of the submarine. But with fires burning in 2 different compartments simultaneously, isolation became impossible. The crew found themselves fighting a war on multiple fronts, their resources and manpower stretched beyond breaking point. As the fires raged, they began to affect the submarine's nuclear reactor. The extreme heat and smoke threatened the reactor's cooling systems, raising the terrifying possibility of a nuclear accident in the middle of a NATO naval exercise. The crew faced the impossible choice of trying to save their submarine or preventing a nuclear catastrophe that could have international implications. The submarine's nuclear reactor, designed to be one of the safest components aboard the vessel, became a potential weapon of mass destruction. If the fires reached critical systems, or if the reactor's cooling failed, K-8 could become a floating nuclear bomb in the middle of Western naval forces. The political and environmental consequences would be catastrophic. Despite the crew's desperate efforts, the fires continued to spread. The submarine's electrical systems began failing one by one, plunging sections of the vessel into darkness. Communication systems went down, leaving the crew unable to coordinate their firefighting efforts effectively. The submarine's life support system struggled to provide breathable air as smoke filled more and more compartments. As conditions aboard K-8 deteriorated, the submarine was forced to surface in the middle of the NATO exercise. The sight of a Soviet nuclear submarine emerging in distress among Western naval forces created a tense diplomatic situation. Should the NATO forces offer assistance to their Cold War enemy, or maintain their distance from what could be a nuclear threat? The decision was made to offer humanitarian assistance, and several NATO vessels moved to help evacuate the Soviet crew. But the operation was complicated by the ongoing fires and the submarine's nuclear reactor, which continued to pose a potential threat to any rescue vessels that came too close. 52 Soviet sailors died in the fires, their deaths a testament to the ferocity of the blazes that had consumed their submarine. Those who survived owed their lives to the heroic efforts of their shipmates and the humanitarian assistance of their supposed enemies. But their survival came at the cost of one of the most advanced submarines in the Soviet fleet. As K-8 finally slipped beneath the waves, she took with her not only the lives of brave sailors, but also one of the most puzzling mysteries in submarine history. How had two fires erupted simultaneously in separate compartments? What force could have caused such an unprecedented failure of multiple safety systems? The Soviet investigation was hampered by the loss of the submarine and the deaths of many crew members who might have provided crucial testimony. The few survivors could offer little insight into the fire's origins. They had been too busy fighting for their lives to observe the initial moments of the disaster. The investigation's conclusions were classified and remain largely secret to this day. Theories about the dual fires ranged from the plausible to the paranormal. Some investigators suggested that electrical faults in the submarine's power systems might have created multiple ignition sources simultaneously. Others proposed that oxygen leaks could have created an atmosphere so volatile that any spark might trigger fires in multiple locations. More controversial theories suggested sabotage, either by Western intelligence agencies seeking to cripple a Soviet nuclear submarine during a crucial NATO exercise, or by Soviet personnel opposed to their government's policies. But no evidence ever emerged to support such claims, and the simultaneous nature of the fires made sabotage seem unlikely. Perhaps the most unsettling possibility was that the fires were the result of design flaws that the Soviets had never recognized. If K-8 systems were inherently prone to such failures, other submarines of the same class might be equally vulnerable. The implications for the Soviet submarine fleet would be devastating. The loss of K-8 sent shockwaves through the Soviet Navy and submarine forces worldwide. The idea that two fires could erupt simultaneously in a single submarine challenged fundamental assumptions about submarine safety and design. If such an event could happen once, what was to prevent it from happening again? The mystery of K-8's dual fires remains unsolved more than half a century later. The submarine rests on the ocean floor of the Bay of Biscay, her secrets buried with her crew. The exact cause of the fires that claimed her has never been definitively determined, making her loss one of the most baffling submarine disasters in naval history. Today, submarine designers continue to study the K-8 incident, trying to understand how such an impossible event could have occurred. The lessons learned from her loss have influenced submarine safety protocols and firefighting systems, but the fundamental mystery remains. In the depths where K-8 rests, the ocean keeps its own counsel, holding tight to secrets that may never be revealed. Story 7. The HMS Thetis Valve Mystery. From the fiery depths where K-8 met her fate, we journey back through time to the pre-war world, where naval technology was advancing rapidly, but safety protocols had yet to catch up with engineering ambitions. Here, in the familiar waters of Liverpool Bay, a routine test would become one of Britain's most haunting submarine disasters. This is a story that unfolds not in the distant reaches of hostile waters, but practically within sight of shore, where rescue should have been certain, where help was only minutes away, where 99 men died within reach of safety they would never see. The fatal test. June 1st, 1939. Liverpool Bay stretched peacefully under the early summer sun, its waters busy with the ordinary traffic of one of Britain's busiest ports. Merchant vessels, fishing boats, and naval craft moved about their daily business, creating a scene of industrial prosperity that masked the growing tensions across Europe. War clouds were gathering, but for now, the bay remained a place of routine operations and familiar procedures. HMS Thetis was conducting her final trials before joining the Royal Navy's submarine fleet, her sleek hull cutting through the calm waters as her crew put her systems through their paces. She was a state-of-the-art T-class submarine, representing the pinnacle of British submarine design and engineering. Everything about the day suggested routine success: clear weather, experienced crew, well-tested procedures. But routine has a way of becoming deadly when the ocean is involved. HMS Thetis was more than just another submarine. She was the embodiment of British naval engineering prowess in the late 1930s. Her design incorporated lessons learned from decades of submarine warfare, with advanced safety systems and redundant controls that should have made disasters virtually impossible. The submarine trials were meant to be a formality, a final check before she entered active service with the Royal Navy. On board were not only her regular crew but also civilian technicians from the shipyard, naval inspectors, and other personnel involved in her construction and testing. The total complement was 103 souls, far more than the submarine would normally carry, but appropriate for the comprehensive trials being conducted. Among them were some of the most experienced submarine experts in the Royal Navy. The test that would doom them all was seemingly insignificant, a routine check of the submarine's ballast systems. The procedure involved opening and closing various valves to ensure that the submarine could properly control her buoyancy and diving characteristics. It was the kind of test that had been performed thousands of times on other submarines without incident. But something went catastrophically wrong. During the test, a valve was opened that should have remained closed, or perhaps a valve that should have been opened remained closed. The exact sequence of events has never been definitively established, but the result was immediate and devastating. Water began flooding into the submarine at a rate that quickly overwhelmed her pumping systems and emergency procedures. The flood of seawater was so rapid and voluminous that it caught even the experienced crew off guard. Within minutes, entire compartments were underwater, and the submarine began to sink toward the bottom of Liverpool Bay. The crew attempted to execute emergency surfacing procedures, but their efforts were hampered by the speed of the flooding and the failure of critical systems. What makes the disaster even more tragic is that HMS Thetis sank in relatively shallow water, only about 160 feet deep. Under normal circumstances, this depth should have been easily survivable. The submarine should have been able to surface using emergency procedures, or at the very least the crew should have been able to escape using standard emergency equipment. But nothing about the HMS Thetis disaster was normal. As the submarine settled on the bottom of Liverpool Bay, her stern section remained above water, clearly visible to any passing vessel. Rescue ships quickly arrived on the scene, and it seemed that the disaster might be contained. With part of the submarine still above the surface, rescue appeared to be a matter of cutting through the hull and evacuating the crew. But the rescue efforts were plagued by problems that seemed to multiply with each passing hour. The submarine's position was unstable, and attempts to secure her only seemed to make the situation worse. Cutting equipment proved inadequate for the submarine's thick steel hull. Communication with the crew inside was sporadic and confusing. Most tragically of all, the crew's attempts to escape through the submarine's own systems failed repeatedly. The escape hatches, designed to allow personnel to exit a submerged submarine, malfunctioned or became blocked. Emergency breathing apparatus failed to function properly. Systems that should have saved lives became death traps. As hours passed, the situation inside the submarine became increasingly desperate. The air grew foul as carbon dioxide levels rose and oxygen levels dropped. The crew, packed into the remaining air pockets within the hull, faced the slow horror of suffocation while rescue ships worked frantically above them. The rescue operation became a nightmare of near misses and failed attempts. Several times, it seemed that breakthrough was imminent, only for equipment to fail, procedures to go wrong, or new complications to arise. The visible portion of the submarine's hull became a cruel tease, so close to salvation yet impossibly distant. One by one, the men inside HMS Thetis succumbed to carbon dioxide poisoning. Of the 103 souls aboard, only 4 survived, men who happened to be in the right place at the right time when a brief escape opportunity presented itself. The other 99 died within sight of shore, their deaths made even more tragic by the proximity of help that never quite arrived. The investigation that followed revealed a cascade of failures that had turned a routine test into a mass casualty event. The valve that had caused the initial flooding had been opened in error, but why this had happened remained unclear. The submarine's emergency systems had failed to function as designed, but the reasons for these failures were complex and multifaceted. Perhaps most disturbing of all was the discovery that the submarine's escape systems, which should have allowed the crew to evacuate even from a submerged vessel, had proven inadequate under real-world conditions. The equipment that looked perfect in controlled tests became useless when lives depended on it. The loss of HMS Thetis exposed fundamental flaws in submarine design and safety protocols that had been hidden by the controlled conditions of previous tests. The disaster forced the Royal Navy to completely reconsider its approach to submarine safety, leading to new designs and procedures that would save countless lives in the coming war. But for the families of the 99 men who died, these improvements came too late. The knowledge that their loved ones had died so close to safety, that rescue had been possible but had failed due to a series of preventable errors, made their grief even more difficult to bear. The mystery of exactly why the valve was opened, why the emergency systems failed, and why the rescue efforts proved so tragically inadequate has never been fully resolved. The disaster was attributed to a combination of human error, design flaws, and procedural failures, but the specific sequence of events that led to the catastrophe remains partially unclear. HMS Thetis was eventually raised from Liverpool Bay and rebuilt as HMS Thunderbolt, serving with distinction during World War II before being lost to enemy action in 1943. But her original identity as the submarine that claimed 99 lives in a preventable disaster continues to haunt submarine historians and safety experts. The wreck's location in shallow water near Liverpool made recovery possible, but it also served as a constant reminder of how close the men had come to salvation. Every piece of equipment recovered, every system examined, told the same tragic story. Rescue had been possible, survival had been within reach, yet 99 men had died anyway. Today, the HMS Thetis disaster remains a sobering reminder of how quickly routine operations can become deadly when multiple failures cascade together. The submarine's loss highlighted the razor-thin margin between safety and catastrophe in the underwater world, where a single valve, opened or closed at the wrong moment, can mean the difference between life and death for an entire crew. In the depths of maritime history, HMS Thetis stands as a monument to the men who died within sight of shore, and a warning that in the unforgiving environment of the sea, even the shortest distance between danger and safety can prove impossible to cross. Story 8. The S-80 Arctic Vanishing. From the tragic shores of Liverpool Bay, we return once more to the hostile Arctic waters, where the Soviet Navy conducted some of its most secretive and dangerous operations. Here, in the endless white expanse of the Barents Sea, submarines operated at the very edge of human endurance, pushing both technology and courage to their absolute limits. This is the story of a submarine that vanished into the Arctic silence, leaving behind only questions that would remain frozen in secrecy for decades. Lost in the White Silence. January 27th, 1961. The Barents Sea lay locked in the grip of Arctic winter, its surface covered by shifting ice floes that stretched to the horizon under the pale polar sky. Beneath this frozen wasteland, the water was black and bitter cold, a realm where death could claim the unwary in mere minutes. It was here, in this most unforgiving of environments, that the Soviet submarine S-80 was conducting operations that were so classified they would remain secret for years after her loss. The submarine and all 68 souls aboard would vanish into the Arctic silence, becoming another mystery in the long list of vessels claimed by the polar seas. S-80 was a Foxtrot-class diesel-electric submarine, one of the workhorses of the Soviet Navy's underwater fleet. These submarines were designed for extended patrols in harsh conditions, their robust construction and reliable systems making them ideal for operations in the challenging waters of the Arctic Ocean. Her crew was experienced in cold weather operations, trained to handle the unique challenges of submarine warfare in polar regions. But even experience and training have their limits when facing the absolute hostility of the Arctic environment. The submarine's mission in the Barents Sea was never officially disclosed, but it likely involved intelligence gathering, patrol operations, or training exercises in the waters that formed the northern frontier of the Soviet Union. The Barents Sea was strategically crucial during the Cold War, serving as both a highway for Soviet nuclear submarines and a potential battleground should hostilities break out with North Atlantic Treaty Organization forces. On that January morning, S-80 began what should have been another routine dive beneath the ice. The procedure was familiar to Arctic submariners: slip beneath the ice cover, conduct operations in the relative protection of the deep water, then surface through carefully selected polinyas, or thin ice areas, when the mission was complete. But S-80 never surfaced again. The first indication of trouble was the submarine's failure to report at scheduled communication windows. In the Soviet Navy, as in all submarine forces, Regular communication was a lifeline that connected underwater vessels to their command structure. When S-80 failed to make contact, search operations began immediately. The search for the missing submarine was hampered by the extreme conditions of the Arctic winter. Pack ice made surface navigation treacherous, while underwater, the searchers faced the same hostile environment that may have claimed S-80. Aircraft could provide only limited assistance in the vast expanse of the Barents Sea, their search patterns constrained by weather and fuel limitations. Days turned into weeks as the search continued without success. The Arctic Ocean seemed to have swallowed S-80 as completely as if she had never existed. No debris was found, no oil slicks detected, no emergency signals received. The submarine had simply vanished into the white silence of the polar world. It would be 7 years before S-80 was finally located. When the wreck was discovered in 1968, it provided some answers but raised even more questions. The submarine lay on the bottom of the Barents Sea, her hull apparently intact but showing signs of catastrophic flooding. The evidence suggested that water had entered through the snorkel system, the device that allowed the submarine to run her diesel engines while remaining submerged. But why had the snorkel failed so catastrophically? The system was a mature technology, well-tested and reliable under normal conditions. Soviet submarines had been using snorkels for years without major incidents. What had made S-80's snorkel become a death trap instead of a lifeline? The investigation was complicated by the 7-year delay between the sinking and the discovery of the wreck. The harsh Arctic environment had taken its toll on the submarine, making forensic analysis difficult. Salt water, pressure, and cold had altered or destroyed much of the evidence that might have revealed the exact cause of the disaster. Several theories emerged to explain the loss of S-80, each highlighting different aspects of the challenges faced by submarines operating in Arctic conditions. The most plausible explanation centered on the snorkel system's vulnerability to ice formation. In the extreme cold of the Arctic, ice could form rapidly on any exposed surface, potentially blocking the snorkel's air intake or damaging its valves. If ice had blocked the snorkel while the submarine was running on diesel power, the engines would have continued to draw air from inside the submarine, potentially creating a vacuum that could collapse the vessel or draw seawater through compromised seals. This scenario would explain the rapid flooding that appeared to have doomed S-80. But this theory raised its own questions. Why hadn't the crew detected the ice formation and shut down the engines before catastrophic damage occurred? Soviet submarine crews were trained to monitor snorkel operations carefully, especially in Arctic conditions where ice was a constant threat. The submarine should have had warning systems to alert the crew to snorkel problems. Another possibility was that the submarine had encountered an underwater ice ridge, a massive formation of ice extending far below the surface. Such ridges could damage a submarine's hull or snorkel system if encountered unexpectedly. The Arctic Ocean was full of such hazards, many of them unmapped and constantly shifting with the movement of the pack ice above. Human error was also considered as a potential factor. Operating a submarine in Arctic conditions required constant vigilance and precise adherence to safety procedures. A single mistake, a valve opened at the wrong time, a system activated in the wrong sequence, could have catastrophic consequences in the unforgiving polar environment. The secretive nature of S-80's mission added another layer of mystery to her loss. The Soviet Navy released very little information about the submarine's activities, making it difficult for investigators to understand the full context of the disaster. Was the submarine conducting routine operations, or was she involved in something more dangerous that might have contributed to her loss? Cold War tensions also fueled speculation about external factors that might have caused the submarine's loss. Some theorists suggested that S-80 might have encountered Western submarines or naval forces, leading to a confrontation that resulted in her sinking. But no evidence ever emerged to support such claims, and the condition of the wreck suggested internal flooding rather than external attack. The loss of S-80 highlighted the extreme dangers faced by submarine crews operating in Arctic conditions. The polar seas were hostile enough without the added complexities of underwater operations, and the disaster demonstrated how quickly routine procedures could become fatal when combined with the unforgiving Arctic environment. The Soviet Navy's response to the loss was typical of the era: official secrecy combined with internal investigation and procedural changes. New safety protocols were implemented for Arctic operations, and submarine designs were modified to better handle the challenges of polar warfare. But the specific lessons learned from S-80's loss remained classified for decades. For the families of the 68 crew members, the loss was devastating and made worse by the official secrecy surrounding the submarine's mission. They were left with few details about how their loved ones had died, and it would be years before they learned even the basic facts about the submarine's discovery and the likely cause of her loss. The wreck of S-80 remains on the bottom of the Barents Sea, a grave for 68 Soviet sailors and a reminder of the price paid by those who ventured into the world's most hostile waters. Her loss stands as a testament to the courage of submarine crews who operated in conditions that pushed both human endurance and technological capability to their absolute limits. In the Arctic silence where S-80 rests, the ice continues its eternal dance above, indifferent to the human tragedy that lies beneath. The submarine's story has become part of the larger narrative of Cold War submarine operations, a hidden war fought in the depths by men whose sacrifices often went unrecognized, and whose losses were sometimes never fully explained. The mystery of exactly what caused S-80's snorkel to fail so catastrophically may never be completely solved. The Arctic Ocean keeps its secrets well, and the passage of time has only deepened the mystery surrounding this particular loss. But the submarine's fate serves as a sobering reminder of the razor-thin line between success and disaster in the underwater world, where the margin for error disappears entirely when facing the absolute hostility of the polar seas. Story 9. The USS Dolphin Anomaly. From the frozen mysteries of the Arctic, we dive into the modern era, where advanced technology and sophisticated safety systems should have made submarine disasters a thing of the past. This is the story of a research submarine operating in the familiar waters off California, equipped with cutting-edge technology and manned by some of the most experienced crew in the Navy. Yet even in the 21st century, with all our advances in submarine design and safety protocols, the ocean still found ways to humble our most sophisticated vessels, in ways that defied explanation. The Impossible Cascade. May 21st, 2002. The Pacific Ocean off San Diego sparkled under the California sun, its blue waters a deceptive facade hiding the complex currents and underwater canyons that make these waters both valuable for research and potentially treacherous for the unwary. USS Dolphin, the Navy's premier deep-sea research submarine, was conducting operations in these familiar waters, her mission involving classified research that pushed the boundaries of underwater technology. But familiarity breeds complacency, and the ocean respects neither experience nor advanced engineering. USS Dolphin was unlike any other submarine in the world. Purpose-built for research rather than warfare, she was a marvel of specialized engineering designed to dive deeper and operate more precisely than conventional military submarines. Her hull was reinforced to withstand extreme pressures, her systems were redundant beyond the requirements of normal naval vessels, and her crew was trained to handle the most challenging research missions. She was, by all accounts, one of the safest submarines ever built. The research mission that day was routine by Dolphin standards, conducting deep water tests of experimental equipment that would someday find its way onto operational submarines. The work required precise positioning and careful monitoring of multiple systems, the kind of complex operation that Dolphin had performed hundreds of times without incident. But on this particular morning, routine transformed into nightmare with shocking speed. The first sign of trouble came from the submarine's electrical systems. Without warning, critical circuits began failing throughout the vessel, plunging sections of the submarine into darkness and disabling essential safety equipment. The failures weren't gradual or predictable. They cascaded through the submarine systems like a plague, affecting components that should have been completely isolated from each other. As the crew struggled to understand and contain the electrical failures, a second catastrophe struck. Water began flooding into the submarine through mechanisms that investigators would later struggle to explain. The flooding wasn't the result of hull damage or obvious system failure. It seemed to emerge from multiple sources simultaneously, overwhelming the submarine's pumping systems and emergency procedures. The combination of electrical failure and flooding created a scenario that submarine designers had considered virtually impossible. Modern submarines are built with redundant systems precisely to prevent such cascading failures. If electrical systems fail, emergency power should maintain critical functions. If flooding occurs, compartmentalization should contain the damage. The idea that both catastrophes could strike simultaneously stretched the boundaries of probability. But probability means nothing to the ocean. As water continued to pour into the submarine and electrical systems failed throughout the vessel, the crew found themselves fighting for their lives in ways they had never imagined. The research equipment that was supposed to be their greatest asset became a liability, drawing power and taking up space that might have been used for emergency systems. The submarine's position near the surface became both a blessing and a curse. While it meant that evacuation was possible, it also meant that the crew had to abandon their vessel, a decision that no submarine captain makes lightly. Dolphin represented millions of dollars in specialized equipment and years of research data. Her loss would be a devastating blow to the Navy's research programs. But the crew's survival took precedence over any equipment or data. The evacuation of USS Dolphin was a testament to the training and professionalism of her crew. Despite the chaos of simultaneous flooding and electrical failure, the evacuation was conducted in an orderly fashion that saved every life aboard. But as the crew watched from rescue vessels, their submarine, one of the most advanced research platforms in the world, slipped beneath the California waves. The subsequent investigation into Dolphin's near loss would prove almost as mysterious as the incident itself. The submarine was eventually raised and examined in detail, but the exact sequence of events that had led to the cascading failures remained elusive. The electrical problems appeared to have originated from multiple sources, making it difficult to identify a single point of failure. The flooding had occurred through several different pathways, suggesting a systemic breakdown rather than a simple mechanical failure. Perhaps most puzzling of all was the timing. Why had multiple, supposedly independent systems failed simultaneously? The probability of such a coincidence was so low that investigators began looking for common factors that might explain the cascade of disasters. The submarine's mission added another layer of complexity to the investigation. Much of the research being conducted aboard Dolphin was classified, involving experimental technologies that were still in development. Could the experimental equipment have somehow interfered with the submarine's normal systems? Were there interactions between cutting-edge research gear and conventional submarine systems that hadn't been anticipated? The investigation was further complicated by the damage the submarine had suffered during the flooding. Salt water and electrical equipment are natural enemies, and the flooding had destroyed or contaminated much of the evidence that might have revealed the true cause of the failures. Investigators were left to piece together the sequence of events from damaged components and incomplete data. Several theories emerged to explain the Dolphin incident, each highlighting different aspects of the challenges faced by modern research submarines. The most conventional explanation suggested that a single electrical fault had cascaded through the submarine systems, causing multiple failures that appeared unrelated but actually stemmed from a common source. But this theory struggled to explain the simultaneous flooding, which appeared to have been caused by mechanical rather than electrical failures. How could an electrical problem lead to water entering the submarine through multiple pathways? The submarine's design should have prevented such cross-contamination of systems. Another theory focused on the experimental nature of much of Dolphin's equipment. Research submarines often operate with modified systems and experimental gear that may not have been fully tested under all conditions. Could some piece of experimental equipment have created an electromagnetic pulse or other interference that affected both electrical and mechanical systems? The most unsettling theory was that the Dolphin incident represented a fundamental vulnerability in modern submarine design, a previously unknown interaction between systems that could affect any advanced submarine under the right conditions. If this was true, then every submarine in the fleet might be vulnerable to similar cascading failures. The secrecy surrounding much of Dolphin's research mission made it difficult to fully investigate some of these theories. Classified equipment and procedures couldn't be discussed in detail, limiting the scope of the official investigation and fueling speculation about what might have been hidden from public view. The incident had far-reaching implications for submarine safety protocols and research procedures. The Navy was forced to reconsider the assumptions underlying submarine design, particularly the belief that redundant systems would prevent catastrophic failures. New safety protocols were implemented for research submarines, and emergency procedures were revised to account for the possibility of multiple simultaneous failures. But perhaps the most important lesson from the Dolphin incident was that even the most advanced technology is vulnerable to unexpected interactions and cascading failures. The submarine had been equipped with systems that represented the cutting edge of naval technology, yet these same systems had somehow turned against the vessel and her crew. The near loss of USS Dolphin serves as a humbling reminder that the ocean remains an environment where even our most sophisticated vessels operate at the mercy of forces we don't fully understand. Despite all our advances in submarine technology and safety systems, the sea continues to find new ways to challenge our assumptions and test our limits. Today, USS Dolphin has been repaired and returned to service, continuing her vital research mission in the waters off California. But the memory of that May morning, when she nearly became another submarine mystery, serves as a constant reminder that in the underwater world, complacency can be fatal, and the impossible can become reality with shocking speed. The exact cause of the cascading failures that nearly claimed USS Dolphin may never be fully understood. The incident remains a modern submarine mystery, a reminder that even in an age of advanced technology and sophisticated safety systems, the ocean still holds the power to humble our most sophisticated creations. In the depths off San Diego, where Dolphin continues her research missions, the waters keep their secrets about what exactly went wrong that May morning. The submarine's near loss stands as proof that mystery and danger didn't disappear with the advent of modern technology. They simply found new and more sophisticated ways to manifest themselves in the eternal struggle between human engineering and the unforgiving sea. Story 10. The Kursk Catastrophe. From the mysterious near miss off California, we venture into one of the most tragic and controversial submarine disasters of the modern era. This is the story of a submarine that represented the pinnacle of Russian naval engineering, a nuclear-powered leviathan that carried enough firepower to level entire cities, yet was destroyed by forces that investigators still struggle to fully understand. The loss of the Kursk would become more than just a maritime disaster. It would become a symbol of human hubris, political failure, and the ocean's ultimate authority over even our most powerful war machines. The Thunder Beneath the Waves. August 12th, 2000. The Barents Sea lay calm under the Arctic summer sky, its waters deceptively peaceful as they concealed one of the largest naval exercises in post-Soviet Russian history. Below the surface, submarines maneuvered in a deadly choreography, their crews demonstrating the tactics and capabilities that formed the backbone of Russia's nuclear deterrent. At the center of this underwater ballet was the K-141 Kursk, a nuclear submarine so advanced and powerful that she represented the future of underwater warfare. The Kursk was no ordinary submarine. She was an Oscar II-class nuclear attack submarine, one of the largest and most heavily armed underwater vessels ever built. Her hull stretched over 500 feet in length, and her nuclear reactor could propel her through the depths at speeds that rivaled surface warships. Armed with nuclear torpedoes and cruise missiles, she carried enough firepower to single-handedly alter the course of any naval engagement. Her crew of 118 was among the elite of the Russian Navy, handpicked for their skill and experience. Many were veterans of the Soviet submarine force, trained in the traditions of underwater warfare that had made Russian submarines feared throughout the Cold War. They were conducting a routine torpedo exercise, the kind of training that submarines had performed thousands of times without incident. But in the underwater world, routine can become catastrophic in the span of a heartbeat. At approximately 11:28 a.m. local time, something went catastrophically wrong aboard the Kursk. Seismic monitoring stations across the region detected two massive explosions, separated by just over 2 minutes, the first equivalent to about 100 kilograms of TNT, the second to nearly 2 tons. The explosions were so powerful they registered on earthquake detection equipment hundreds of miles away. The Kursk, pride of the Russian Navy, had been destroyed by her own weapons. The initial investigation pointed to a catastrophic torpedo malfunction. The submarine had been conducting live-fire exercises with practice torpedoes when one of the weapons apparently exploded while still in its tube. This first explosion, devastating though it was, might have been survivable, but it triggered a second, far more powerful blast that tore through the submarine's forward compartments like a nuclear bomb. But what had caused the torpedo to explode in the first place? Modern torpedo technology includes multiple safety systems designed to prevent exactly this kind of accident. The weapons should have been inert until they cleared the submarine and activated their warheads. For a torpedo to explode while still aboard the submarine suggested a failure so fundamental it challenged basic assumptions about weapons safety. The Russian Navy's official explanation centered on a particular type of torpedo fuel, hydrogen peroxide, that had been known to be unstable under certain conditions. The highly concentrated peroxide used in submarine torpedoes could react explosively if it came into contact with certain materials or if its containment systems failed. A leak of this fuel could have triggered the initial explosion that doomed the Kursk. But this explanation raises many questions as it answered. Why would the Russian Navy continue to use fuel that was known to be dangerous? Why hadn't safety protocols prevented such a leak? And why had the explosion been so catastrophically destructive? The second explosion, which occurred approximately 2 minutes after the first, was even more mysterious. The blast was so powerful it suggested that multiple torpedoes had detonated simultaneously, yet there was no clear explanation for why the first explosion should have triggered this massive secondary blast. The submarine's design should have contained damage to individual torpedo tubes, preventing the kind of cascading explosion that apparently destroyed the Kursk. Adding to the mystery was the submarine's complete silence following the explosions. Modern submarines are equipped with multiple communication systems and emergency beacons designed to alert rescue forces in the event of disaster. Yet, the Kursk sent no distress signals, made no emergency calls, and activated no rescue beacons. It was as if the entire crew had been incapacitated instantly. The Russian Navy's response to the disaster was marked by confusion, delay, and political considerations that may have cost lives. For days, Russian officials downplayed the severity of the situation, refusing offers of international assistance and maintaining that their own rescue capabilities were adequate. This delay in mounting an effective rescue operation became a source of intense controversy and may have sealed the fate of any crew members who initially survived the explosions. When international rescue teams were finally allowed to examine the wreck, they discovered evidence that some crew members had indeed survived the initial explosions. In the submarine's stern compartments, investigators found signs that sailors had attempted to escape using emergency equipment. The discovery of these survival attempts made the delayed rescue response even more tragic. Men who might have been saved had died while help was being refused. The investigation into the Kursk disaster was complicated by political tensions and conflicting national interests. Russian officials were reluctant to share information about their most advanced submarine technology, while international investigators struggled to understand the technical aspects of the disaster without full access to the evidence. The result was a series of incomplete investigations that left many questions unanswered. Several alternative theories emerged to challenge the official explanation of torpedo malfunction. Some investigators suggested that the Kursk might have collided with another submarine, possibly a North Atlantic Treaty Organization vessel conducting surveillance during the Russian naval exercise. This theory gained credibility when U.S. and British submarines were confirmed to have been operating in the area, though both nations denied any involvement in the disaster. The collision theory attempted to explain some of the anomalies in the official account. If the Kursk had collided with another submarine, it might explain why the torpedo explosion was so catastrophic. The collision could have damaged multiple torpedo tubes simultaneously, leading to the massive secondary explosion. It might also explain the submarine's complete communications failure if the collision had damaged her communications arrays. But no physical evidence of a collision was ever found, and the foreign submarines operating in the area all returned to port without reporting any incidents. The collision theory remained speculative, supported more by political suspicion than by hard evidence. Another controversial theory suggested that the disaster might have been caused by a new type of supercavitating torpedo that the Russians were testing. These weapons, which travel through water in a bubble of gas at incredible speeds, were known to be highly experimental and potentially unstable. If such a weapon had malfunctioned, it might have caused the kind of catastrophic explosion that destroyed the Kursk. The Russian military neither confirmed nor denied the existence of such weapons, leaving this theory in the realm of speculation. But the secrecy surrounding the submarine's weapons load and the nature of her training exercises fueled continued debate about what exactly the Kursk had been carrying when she was destroyed. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the Kursk disaster was how quickly one of the world's most advanced submarines had been reduced to a tomb on the ocean floor. The submarine's nuclear reactor, designed to be virtually indestructible, survived the explosions intact, a testament to Russian engineering. But the crew compartments had been devastated, and 118 of Russia's most experienced submariners had died in a disaster that lasted less than 5 minutes. The loss of the Kursk sent shockwaves through navies worldwide and forced a complete reevaluation of submarine safety protocols, particularly regarding torpedo handling and storage. The disaster highlighted the incredible destructive potential contained within modern submarines and the razor-thin margin between routine operations and catastrophic failure. For the families of the 118 crew members, the disaster was made even more tragic by the confusion and delays that marked the rescue efforts. The knowledge that some of their loved ones might have survived the initial explosions, only to die while rescue was delayed for political reasons, added an element of preventable tragedy to an already devastating loss. The Kursk herself was eventually raised from the Barents Sea floor in one of the most complex salvage operations ever undertaken. The recovery effort revealed additional details about the explosions, but failed to definitively resolve the fundamental question of what had triggered the initial torpedo malfunction. The submarine's forward sections, where the explosions had occurred, were too severely damaged to yield clear evidence about the exact cause of the disaster. Today, the Kursk disaster stands as a sobering reminder of the incredible forces contained within modern submarines and the potential for catastrophic failure when those forces are unleashed. The submarine's loss highlighted the dangers faced by submariners who work with weapons of unimaginable destructive power in an environment where the slightest mistake can have fatal consequences. In the depths of the Barents Sea, where the Kursk story ended, the waters continue their eternal cycle, indifferent to the human tragedy that unfolded beneath their surface. The submarine's loss remains one of the most mysterious and controversial submarine disasters in modern history, a reminder that even our most powerful war machines are vulnerable to forces that we still struggle to understand or control. Story 11. Her Majesty's Australian ship, Dechaineux, Deep Water Terror. From the explosive destruction of the Kursk, we journey to the southern waters of the Pacific, where Australia's submarine force was taking its first tentative steps into the world of modern underwater warfare. This is the story of a submarine that represented a nation's maritime ambitions, a cutting-edge vessel that should have been the pride of the Royal Australian Navy. Instead, she became the centerpiece of a mystery that would shake confidence in submarine design and leave investigators searching for answers that seemed to slip away like water through their fingers. The Abyss Calls. The waters off the Australian coast stretched endlessly under the southern hemisphere sky, their deep blue expanse concealing some of the most challenging underwater terrain on Earth. Her Majesty's Australian ship Dechaineux, one of Australia's new Collins-class submarines, was conducting her deep dive trials in these familiar yet treacherous waters, pushing the boundaries of her design specifications in preparation for operational service. The Collins-class submarines represented Australia's entry into the exclusive club of nations capable of building their own advanced underwater vessels. They were marvels of modern engineering, incorporating the latest in submarine technology and design. The Dechaineux in particular was expected to demonstrate that Australian shipbuilding could compete with the world's best. But the ocean cares nothing for national pride or engineering ambition. The deep dive trial was meant to be a routine demonstration of the submarine's capabilities, a controlled descent to test depth, followed by a systematic evaluation of all systems under maximum pressure. It was the kind of test that modern submarines undergo as a matter of course, designed to prove that the vessel could operate safely at the extremes of her design envelope. The Dechaineux began her descent into the depths with confidence. Her crew was experienced, her systems were functioning normally, and the test conditions were ideal. Everything about the dive suggested another successful milestone in the submarine's commissioning process. But as the submarine descended deeper into the crushing embrace of the ocean, something went catastrophically wrong. Without warning, massive amounts of seawater began flooding into the submarine through multiple pathways. The flooding was so severe and occurred so rapidly that it overwhelmed the crew's ability to respond effectively. Within minutes, entire compartments were underwater, and the submarine was in mortal danger of exceeding her crush depth and imploding like a tin can. What made the flooding particularly mysterious was its apparent randomness. Water seemed to be entering the submarine from several different sources simultaneously, suggesting a systematic failure rather than a single point of damage. The crew found themselves fighting a battle on multiple fronts, trying to stem flooding in different compartments while struggling to maintain control of their rapidly descending vessel. The submarine's ballast systems, designed to control buoyancy and enable emergency surfacing, seemed to be fighting against the crew's efforts. No matter what they did, the Dechaineux continued to sink deeper into the abyss, her hull creaking and groaning under pressures that were approaching the limits of her structural integrity. In a desperate gamble, the crew executed an emergency blow of all ballast tanks, a procedure that should force the submarine to the surface even under the most adverse conditions. For agonizing minutes, it seemed as though even this last resort measure might fail. The submarine continued to descend, her depth gauges registering numbers that brought her closer and closer to the point of no return. Then, miraculously, the submarine began to rise. The emergency blow procedure had finally overcome whatever forces were dragging her toward the bottom, and the Dechaineux began her race back to the surface. The crew worked frantically to control the flooding and stabilize their vessel, knowing that their lives depended on reaching the surface before the submarine's systems failed completely. When Her Majesty's Australian ship Dechaineux finally broke the surface, she was barely recognizable as the pristine submarine that had begun the dive. Water poured from her hull through multiple openings, and her crew scrambled to keep her afloat long enough for rescue vessels to arrive. The submarine that was supposed to demonstrate Australian naval prowess had instead become a testament to how quickly routine operations could become life-or-death struggles. The subsequent investigation into the near loss of Her Majesty's Australian ship Dechaineux would prove almost as mysterious as the incident itself. Engineers and naval architects examined every inch of the submarine, looking for evidence of what had caused the catastrophic flooding. What they found, or more accurately, what they didn't find, would puzzle investigators for years. The submarine showed evidence of multiple seal failures, valve malfunctions, and structural issues that seemed to have occurred simultaneously. But there was no clear explanation for why so many different systems had failed at exactly the same moment. The probability of such a coincidence was so low that investigators began looking for common factors that might explain the cascade of failures. Some theories focused on the extreme pressures encountered during the deep dive. Perhaps the submarine's design had flaws that only became apparent under maximum stress, causing multiple systems to fail when pushed to their limits. But this explanation was troubling for the Collins-class program. If one submarine was vulnerable to such failures, what did that say about the entire class? Other investigators suggested that the submarine might have encountered unexpected environmental conditions during the dive. Underwater currents, temperature variations, or unusual pressure gradients could potentially stress a submarine's systems in ways that weren't anticipated during design. But no such conditions were detected during the dive, leaving this theory unsupported by evidence. Perhaps the most unsettling possibility was that the Dechaineux had encountered some kind of design flaw that was inherent to her construction. Modern submarines are incredibly complex machines, with thousands of interconnected systems that must work together flawlessly under extreme conditions. A flaw in the integration of these systems could potentially cause cascading failures that would be almost impossible to predict or prevent. The investigation was further complicated by the fact that the near disaster had occurred during a deep dive, where access to the submarine systems was limited and monitoring equipment couldn't provide complete coverage. Much of what happened during the critical minutes of flooding remained a mystery, known only to the crew members who had fought to save their vessel. The Royal Australian Navy faced a difficult decision in the wake of the Dechaineux incident. Should they continue with the Collins-class program, accepting that some residual risk was inherent in cutting-edge submarine technology? Or should they fundamentally redesign the submarines to address whatever had caused the near catastrophe? The decision was made to continue with the program, but with extensive modifications to address the potential causes of the flooding. New safety systems were installed, procedures were revised, and additional training was implemented to help crews deal with similar emergencies. But the fundamental question of what had actually gone wrong remained largely unanswered. The incident had far-reaching implications for submarine design and operation worldwide. If a modern, well-designed submarine could experience such catastrophic system failures during routine operations, what did that say about the safety margins of other submarines? The Dechaineux incident forced naval architects to reconsider their assumptions about submarine reliability and the effectiveness of redundant safety systems. For the crew of Her Majesty's Australian ship Dechaineux, the near disaster was a traumatic reminder of how quickly routine operations could become life-threatening emergencies. Their quick thinking and professional response had saved their submarine and their lives, but the experience left them with a deep appreciation for the ocean's power to humble even the most advanced technology. The submarine itself was eventually repaired and returned to service, going on to serve with distinction in the Royal Australian Navy. But the memory of that terrifying descent into the abyss remained with everyone who had been involved in the incident, a reminder that the margin between success and disaster in the underwater world could be measured in mere minutes. The mystery of what exactly went wrong during Her Majesty's Australian ship Dechaineux's deep dive trial has never been fully resolved. The incident remains a sobering reminder that even the most modern submarines operate in an environment where the slightest flaw or malfunction can have catastrophic consequences. In the depths where pressure reigns supreme and rescue is often impossible, the ocean continues to test the limits of human engineering and the courage of those who venture into its embrace. Today, as Australia's submarine program continues to evolve and expand, the lessons learned from the Dechaineux incident continue to influence design decisions and safety protocols. The submarine's near loss stands as a testament to both the dangers of underwater operations and the skill of the crews who risk their lives to master the ocean's challenges. Story 12. The HNoMS Uredd vanishing. From the deep waters off Australia, we journey back through time, to the dark days of World War II, when the waters around occupied Norway became a deadly battleground between freedom fighters and the Nazi war machine. Here, beneath the frigid waves of the Norwegian Sea, submarines carried out some of the most dangerous missions of the war, operations so secret that many remain classified to this day. This is the story of a submarine that vanished while fighting a war in the shadows, leaving behind a mystery that would remain unsolved for over 4 decades. The Phantom of the Norwegian Sea. February 1943. The Norwegian Sea lay gray and forbidding under the Arctic winter sky, its waters hiding both deadly German patrols and the Norwegian resistance fighters who dared to challenge the Nazi occupation of their homeland. In this hostile environment, where survival was measured in minutes and discovery meant certain death, Allied submarines conducted some of the most perilous operations of World War II. HNoMS Uredd was one of these shadow warriors, a Norwegian submarine operating under British command in the desperate fight to liberate occupied Europe. The Uredd wasn't just any submarine. She was a symbol of Norwegian resistance and defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. Built before the war, she had escaped to Britain when Germany invaded Norway, becoming part of the Royal Navy's growing fleet of Allied submarines. Her crew was a mix of Norwegian patriots and British submariners, united by their determination to strike back at the Nazi occupation forces. Her mission in February 1943 was both crucial and deadly, to infiltrate Norwegian coastal waters and conduct operations against German shipping and military installations. It was the kind of mission that required not only courage, but also intimate knowledge of local waters and conditions, knowledge that could mean the difference between success and annihilation. The submarine departed from her British base with high hopes and detailed planning. Her crew was experienced, her mission was well-researched, and intelligence reports suggested favorable conditions for the operation. Everything about the mission suggested another successful strike against the German war machine. But HNoMS Uredd would never return from Norwegian waters. The first indication that something had gone wrong was the submarine's failure to report at scheduled communication windows. In the deadly game of submarine warfare, regular communication was a lifeline that connected underwater vessels to their command structure and potential rescue. When Uredd failed to make contact, alarm bells began ringing throughout the Royal Navy's submarine command. Search operations were launched immediately, but they faced the same challenges that made submarine warfare so dangerous in the first place. The Norwegian Sea was patrolled by German aircraft and surface vessels, making open search operations impossible. Allied submarines and aircraft had to conduct their searches covertly, limiting their effectiveness and increasing the danger to the searchers themselves. Days turned into weeks, as the search continued without success. The Norwegian Sea seemed to have swallowed Uredd as completely, as if she had never existed. No debris was found, no oil slicks detected, no emergency signals received. The submarine had simply vanished into the gray waters of her homeland's coast. It would be 42 years before HNoMS Uredd was finally located. When the wreck was discovered in 1985, it provided some answers, but raised even more troubling questions. The submarine lay on the bottom of the Norwegian Sea, her hull showing evidence of a massive explosion that had torn through her pressure hull. The damage was consistent with a mine strike, one of the most feared hazards of submarine warfare during World War II. But the discovery of the wreck only deepened the mystery surrounding Uredd's loss. If the submarine had struck a mine, why hadn't her experienced crew detected the threat and taken evasive action? The waters where she was found were known to be dangerous, but they weren't considered impassable by submarines, with proper navigation and sonar equipment. The investigation into the wreck revealed that Uredd had been conducting operations in an area that German intelligence had heavily mined as part of their coastal defense strategy. The minefield was a maze of explosive devices, designed to destroy any Allied submarine that attempted to penetrate Norwegian waters. But the minefield's exact location and extent were classified German secrets, unknown to Allied intelligence. This discovery raised troubling questions about the planning and execution of Uredd's mission. Had British and Norwegian intelligence underestimated the extent of German mining operations? Had the submarine been sent into waters that were far more dangerous than anyone realized? Or had Uredd encountered an uncharted minefield that hadn't existed when her mission was planned? The evidence suggested that the submarine had struck a mine while submerged, causing a catastrophic explosion that killed her crew instantly. But this scenario raised its own questions about submarine procedures and equipment. Why hadn't Uredd's sonar detected the mine? Why hadn't her crew taken evasive action when entering what they must have known were dangerous waters? Modern submarine sonar systems, even those of World War II vintage, were generally capable of detecting large metallic objects like naval mines. The fact that Uredd apparently sailed directly into a mine suggested either equipment failure, operator error, or environmental conditions that made detection impossible. One possibility was that the mine had been a new type of German weapon that was designed to be difficult to detect. The Nazis were constantly developing new technologies for submarine warfare, including acoustic mines that were triggered by sound rather than contact. If Uredd had encountered such a weapon, her crew might have had no warning of the danger until it was too late. Another theory suggested that environmental conditions in the Norwegian Sea might have interfered with the submarine's sonar systems. Winter storms, ice formations, and unusual underwater currents could potentially create false readings or mask the presence of mines. In such conditions, even experienced crews might find themselves navigating blind through waters that were far more dangerous than they appeared. The most unsettling possibility was that Uredd had been deliberately lured into the minefield by German intelligence. The Nazis were known to have broken some Allied communication codes, and they might have been aware of the submarine's mission and route. If this was the case, then Uredd's crew had sailed into a trap from which there was no escape. The wartime context of Uredd's loss added layers of complexity to any investigation. World War II's submarine operations were conducted under conditions of extreme secrecy, with limited communication and documentation. Many records were destroyed during the war, either deliberately or as a result of enemy action, making it difficult to reconstruct exactly what had happened during the submarine's final mission. The crew's experience and training made their loss even more puzzling. These were seasoned submariners who had survived some of the most dangerous operations of the war. They knew the risks of operating in enemy waters, and they had the skills and equipment necessary to navigate safely through hostile territory. Their apparent failure to detect and avoid the mine that destroyed them seemed inconsistent with their demonstrated competence. The discovery of Uredd's wreck also revealed the human cost of the submarine's loss. The 37 crew members had died instantly when the mine exploded, their bodies entombed within the submarine's hull. For their families who had waited decades for news of their loved one's fate, the discovery brought both closure and renewed grief. The investigation into Uredd's loss highlighted the extreme dangers faced by submarine crews during World War II, particularly those conducting operations in enemy-controlled waters. The submarine's mission had required her to penetrate some of the most heavily defended waters in the world, where German forces had spent years preparing defensive measures specifically designed to destroy vessels like Uredd. The loss of HNoMS Uredd became part of the larger story of Norwegian resistance during World War II, a tale of courage, sacrifice, and determination in the face of overwhelming odds. The submarine's crew had died fighting for their country's freedom, joining the thousands of other Norwegians who gave their lives in the struggle against Nazi occupation. The mystery of exactly what happened during Uredd's final moments may never be completely solved. The passage of more than 4 decades between her loss and the discovery of her wreck has made detailed forensic analysis difficult. The harsh environment of the Norwegian Sea has taken its toll on the wreck, destroying or altering much of the evidence that might have revealed the precise sequence of events. But the submarine story serves as a powerful reminder of the courage and sacrifice of those who fought in the shadows during World War II. HNoMS Uredd and her crew represent the thousands of submariners who risked everything in the underwater war against fascism, many of whom paid the ultimate price for their dedication to freedom. In the depths of the Norwegian Sea, where Uredd rests in eternal silence, the waters continue their ancient rhythms, indifferent to the human drama that unfolded beneath their surface decades ago. The submarine's wreck has become a monument to Norwegian resistance and a reminder of the price of freedom, a price that was paid by brave men who sailed into danger, knowing they might never return. Story 13. The K-159 Towing Disaster. From the wartime shadows of the Norwegian Sea, we leap forward to the post-Cold War era, where the collapse of the Soviet Union left behind a legacy of nuclear submarines that had become too dangerous to operate, but too expensive to properly decommission. This is the story of one such vessel, a nuclear submarine that had once prowled the depths as a guardian of Soviet power, only to meet its end in circumstances that seemed to mock the very idea of controlled nuclear decommissioning. In the Barents Sea, where so many submarine mysteries have unfolded, another chapter would be written in the ongoing saga of humanity's struggle to master the atom beneath the waves. The Last Voyage. August 30th, 2003. The Barents Sea stretched endlessly under the pale Arctic sky, its waters reflecting the gray clouds that seemed to perpetually shroud this remote corner of the world. On the surface, a bizarre convoy was making its way slowly through the swells, a collection of tugboats and support vessels surrounding what appeared to be the rusted hulk of a massive submarine. The submarine was K-159, a nuclear-powered vessel that had once been among the Soviet Union's most formidable underwater weapons. Now, more than a decade after the Cold War's end, she was being towed to her final resting place, or so everyone hoped. K-159 represented both the pinnacle and the failure of Soviet submarine technology. Built during the height of the Cold War, she had been designed to hunt American submarines and protect Soviet ballistic missile submarines from enemy attack. Her nuclear reactor had given her virtually unlimited underwater endurance, and her weapon systems had made her a formidable opponent for any enemy she might encounter. But the end of the Cold War had rendered K-159 obsolete almost overnight. The cash-strapped Russian Navy could no longer afford to maintain her nuclear reactor or keep her weapons systems operational. Like dozens of other nuclear submarines, she had been decommissioned and left to rust at her moorings, while officials debated what to do with her radioactive hull. The decision to tow K-159 to a scrapping facility seemed logical enough. The submarine's nuclear fuel had been removed, her reactor had been shut down, and her hull had been sealed to prevent contamination. She was, according to official reports, nothing more than a large piece of metal that needed to be moved from one location to another. But the ocean has its own opinion about human plans and nuclear materials. The towing operation began smoothly enough. K-159 was attached to tugboats by heavy steel cables, and the convoy began its journey across the Barents Sea at a cautious pace. The submarine's hull, though aged and weathered, appeared sound enough to withstand the stresses of being towed through moderate seas. The crew assigned to monitor the submarine during the tow consisted of 9 Russian sailors, whose job was to ensure that the hull remained watertight and that no unexpected problems developed during the voyage. It was considered a routine assignment, boring perhaps, but hardly dangerous for experienced seamen. But as the convoy made its way across the Barents Sea, weather conditions began to deteriorate. What had started as a calm passage became increasingly rough as Arctic storms moved through the area. The seas grew larger, the winds stronger, and the stress on the submarine's aging hull increased dramatically. The first signs of trouble came as reports from the monitoring crew became increasingly concerned about water entering the submarine's hull. The vessel, which should have been completely sealed, was taking on water at an alarming rate. The crew aboard K-159 found themselves fighting a losing battle against flooding that seemed to be coming from multiple sources. As the situation deteriorated, it became clear that K-159 was in mortal danger of sinking. The submarine's ballast tanks, which should have kept her afloat during the tow, were apparently compromised. Water was entering the hull faster than the crew could pump it out, and the submarine was becoming increasingly unstable. The decision was made to cut the tow cables and allow the submarine to sink in deep water, rather than risk her breaking up in shallow areas, where environmental contamination would be more severe. But this decision came too late for the 9 crew members aboard K-159. As the submarine began her final descent into the Barents Sea, the monitoring crew found themselves trapped aboard a sinking nuclear vessel with no means of escape. The lifeboats and emergency equipment that should have allowed them to abandon ship had either been removed during decommissioning or were inaccessible due to the flooding. K-159 sank in just minutes, taking with her 9 Russian sailors and adding another mystery to the Barents Sea's growing collection of submarine disasters. The speed of her sinking and the complete loss of her crew shocked even experienced naval officials who thought they understood the risks of nuclear submarine decommissioning. The subsequent investigation into the sinking of K-159 revealed a cascade of failures that had turned a routine towing operation into a fatal disaster. The submarine's hull, which had been declared seaworthy for towing, apparently had multiple undetected weaknesses that allowed massive flooding once she encountered rough seas. But the investigation raised more questions than it answered. How had such extensive hull damage gone undetected during pre-towing inspections? Why had the monitoring crew been unable to abandon ship when it became clear the submarine was sinking? And why had the sinking occurred so rapidly that experienced sailors had no time to save themselves? Russian officials provided few details about the investigation, citing national security concerns related to nuclear submarine technology. This secrecy fueled speculation about what had really happened during K-159's final voyage and whether there might have been factors involved that the government preferred to keep hidden. Some theories suggested that the submarine's hull had been weakened by years of inadequate maintenance following her decommissioning. The end of the Cold War had left the Russian Navy with hundreds of nuclear submarines that they could no longer afford to properly maintain. Many of these vessels had suffered from corrosion, structural damage, and system failures that made them potential hazards even when supposedly deactivated. Other investigators pointed to the extreme conditions of the Arctic environment as a contributing factor. The Barents Sea is notorious for its sudden storms and rough conditions, which can stress even modern vessels beyond their design limits. A submarine hull that had been weakened by age and poor maintenance might have been particularly vulnerable to such conditions. Perhaps the most troubling theory was that K-159 had sunk due to fundamental flaws in the decommissioning process itself. If a nuclear submarine that had been officially declared safe for towing could sink so rapidly and catastrophically, what did that say about the dozens of other decommissioned nuclear submarines awaiting disposal? The environmental implications of K-159's sinking were also cause for concern. Although her nuclear fuel had reportedly been removed, the submarine still contained radioactive materials that could potentially contaminate the marine environment. The Barents Sea was already home to several nuclear submarines that had been lost during the Cold War, creating an underwater nuclear graveyard that posed long-term environmental risks. The loss of the 9 crew members aboard K-159 added a human tragedy to what was already an environmental and technical disaster. These sailors had been assigned to what should have been a routine mission, only to find themselves trapped aboard a sinking nuclear submarine with no means of escape. Their deaths highlighted the ongoing dangers faced by personnel dealing with the Soviet Union's nuclear legacy. The sinking of K-159 also raised uncomfortable questions about the Russian government's handling of nuclear submarine decommissioning. The incident suggested that official assurances about the safety of decommissioned submarines might be overly optimistic, and that the process of disposing of nuclear vessels was far more dangerous than authorities were willing to admit. International observers expressed concern about the implications of the K-159 disaster for other nuclear submarine disposal operations. If a supposedly safe submarine could sink so catastrophically during a routine towing operation, what might happen to other aging nuclear vessels that were awaiting disposal? The incident highlighted the enormous challenges faced by any nation attempting to safely decommission nuclear submarines. The mystery of exactly what caused K-159 to sink so rapidly has never been fully resolved. The submarine now rests on the bottom of the Barents Sea, her secrets buried with her crew, in the crushing depths of the Arctic Ocean. The lack of detailed official investigation results has left many questions unanswered, contributing to speculation about what really happened during those final moments. The legacy of K-159's loss extends far beyond the immediate tragedy of her sinking. The incident served as a wake-up call about the long-term costs and dangers of nuclear submarine programs, highlighting the fact that the challenges of nuclear technology don't end when submarines are decommissioned. The ocean had claimed another nuclear vessel, adding to the growing underwater graveyard of atomic-powered submarines that will remain radioactive for centuries to come. In the depths of the Barents Sea, where K-159 rests alongside other victims of submarine warfare and nuclear accidents, the waters continue their eternal dance, indifferent to the human folly that has littered the seafloor with radioactive metal. The submarine's final voyage had ended not in the controlled environment of a scrapping facility, but in the unforgiving embrace of the ocean depths, where her nuclear legacy will endure, long after the memory of her crew has faded. The story of K-159 serves as a somber reminder that the nuclear age has created problems that will outlast the civilizations that created them, and that the ocean continues to be the ultimate repository for humanity's most dangerous mistakes. Story 14. The USS San Francisco Seamount Strike. From the radioactive depths where K-159 met her inglorious end, we venture into the vast Pacific Ocean, where advanced technology and sophisticated navigation systems should have made underwater collisions a thing of the past. This is the story of a state-of-the-art nuclear submarine that struck an obstacle that shouldn't have existed, or at least shouldn't have remained undetected by the most advanced sonar systems in the world. In the endless blue of the Pacific, where underwater mountains rise from abyssal depths, even the most sophisticated submarines can encounter forces that humble human technology and challenge our understanding of the ocean's hidden geography. The Invisible Mountain. January 8, 2005. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly in all directions, its surface deceptively calm under the tropical sun. Far below, in the crushing darkness of the deep ocean, USS San Francisco was racing through the depths at flank speed, her nuclear reactor driving her forward with the confidence that comes from cutting-edge technology and decades of operational experience. She was a Los Angeles-class attack submarine, one of the most advanced underwater vessels in the world, equipped with sonar systems that could detect objects miles away and navigation equipment that could pinpoint her location within meters. Her crew was among the most highly trained in the U.S. Navy, experienced in the complex art of high-speed underwater navigation. But the ocean had prepared a surprise that would shatter both confidence and hull plating in a collision that should have been impossible. USS San Francisco was conducting high-speed operations in waters that were considered well-mapped and thoroughly understood. The submarine's mission required precise navigation and rapid movement through areas that had been transited by submarines hundreds of times before. Her route had been carefully planned using the most current charts and oceanographic data available to the Navy. The collision, when it came, was as sudden as it was devastating. At approximately 2:30 p.m. local time, traveling at a speed of over 30 knots, USS San Francisco struck what would later be identified as an uncharted seamount, an underwater mountain that rose from the ocean floor to within a few hundred feet of the surface. The impact was catastrophic, crumpling the submarine's bow and causing massive structural damage throughout the forward sections of the vessel. The force of the collision was so violent that it instantly killed one sailor and injured dozens of others. The submarine's forward ballast tanks were ruptured, her sonar dome was destroyed, and her nuclear reactor was automatically shut down as safety systems responded to the massive shock. In an instant, one of the Navy's most capable submarines had been reduced to a crippled vessel, fighting for survival in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. But perhaps the most shocking aspect of the collision was that it had occurred despite the submarine's sophisticated sonar systems, which should have detected the seamount long before impact. The USS San Francisco was equipped with some of the most advanced underwater detection equipment in existence, capable of mapping the ocean floor in real time and identifying obstacles from considerable distances. How had a mountain-sized obstacle remained invisible to these systems until the moment of impact? The initial investigation focused on the charts and navigation data used by the submarine's crew. The seamount that had nearly destroyed USS San Francisco was not marked on any of the navigation charts available to the crew, despite being large enough to pose a serious hazard to submarine navigation. This discovery raised troubling questions about the accuracy of oceanographic data and the reliability of charts used by the world's submarine forces. The Pacific Ocean covers nearly one-third of Earth's surface and contains thousands of seamounts, underwater ridges, and other geological features. Many of these formations have never been accurately mapped, particularly in the deep ocean areas where submarine operations are most common. The collision highlighted the uncomfortable reality that much of the ocean floor remains as mysterious and uncharted as it was centuries ago. But the chart issue, while serious, didn't explain why the submarine's own sonar systems had failed to detect the seamount. Modern submarine sonar is extraordinarily sophisticated, capable of detecting objects through multiple frequency ranges and processing techniques. The systems aboard USS San Francisco should have been able to identify a large underwater obstacle well before any possibility of collision. The investigation revealed that the submarine had been operating at high speed in an area where such speed was considered safe, based on available charts. The crew had no reason to expect underwater obstacles, and was therefore not employing the more intensive sonar sweeps that might have detected the seamount earlier. This explanation, while technically accurate, raised questions about standard operating procedures and risk assessment protocols. Some investigators suggested that the seamount might have been difficult to detect due to its geological composition or shape. Certain types of rock and mineral formations can absorb or scatter sonar signals in ways that make them less visible to submarine detection systems. If the seamount had such properties, it might explain why it remained undetected until the collision occurred. Another theory focused on the submarine's speed at the time of impact. High-speed underwater operations create their own acoustic environment, with cavitation and flow noise that can interfere with sonar performance. It's possible that the submarine's own speed had created enough acoustic interference to mask the seamount's sonar signature until it was too late to avoid collision. The most unsettling possibility was that the collision represented a fundamental limitation of submarine navigation technology. Despite all the advances in sonar and underwater detection systems, the ocean remains an environment where the unexpected can still occur. If a submarine equipped with the world's most advanced navigation systems could collide with an uncharted seamount, what did that say about the safety of submarine operations in general? The aftermath of the collision became a testament to the skill and training of the submarine's crew. Despite massive damage to their vessel, they managed to surface the submarine and keep her afloat long enough for rescue vessels to arrive. The emergency response procedures developed through decades of submarine operations proved their worth, preventing what could have been a catastrophic loss of the entire vessel and crew. The collision also highlighted the incredible structural integrity of modern submarine designs. Despite striking a solid rock formation at high speed, USS San Francisco's pressure hull remained intact, preventing the catastrophic flooding that would have doomed the submarine. The damage was severe, but the fundamental structure of the vessel survived forces that would have destroyed most surface ships. The repair of USS San Francisco became one of the most complex submarine reconstruction projects ever undertaken. The entire forward section of the submarine had to be rebuilt, requiring months of work and millions of dollars in costs. The project demonstrated both the value of modern submarines and the enormous expense of repairing them when things go wrong. The investigation's findings led to significant changes in submarine navigation procedures and chart-making protocols. New requirements were implemented for sonar surveillance during high-speed operations, and efforts were intensified to improve the accuracy of oceanographic charts used by submarine forces. The collision had exposed gaps in knowledge and procedures that had existed for decades without being recognized. But perhaps the most important lesson from the USS San Francisco incident was the reminder that the ocean remains largely unknown and unpredictable. Despite all our technological advances and mapping efforts, the sea continues to hold surprises that can challenge even our most sophisticated vessels and experienced crews. The seamount that nearly destroyed USS San Francisco has since been properly charted and named, ensuring that future submarine operations in the area will be conducted with full knowledge of its presence. But the incident serves as a reminder that there are thousands of other uncharted features scattered throughout the world's oceans, waiting to be discovered by the next unsuspecting vessel. The submarine herself was eventually repaired and returned to service, continuing her operational career with a new appreciation for the ocean's hidden dangers. But the crew who survived the collision carried with them a sobering understanding of how quickly routine operations could become life-threatening emergencies in the underwater world. Today, USS San Francisco's collision with an invisible mountain stands as one of the most dramatic examples of the ocean's power to surprise and humble even our most advanced technology. In an age when GPS can locate a smartphone to within meters, and satellites can map the surface of Mars in extraordinary detail. The fact that a mountain-sized obstacle could remain undetected in Earth's oceans until struck by a submarine serves as a humbling reminder of how much we still don't know about our own planet. In the depths of the Pacific, where countless seamounts rise from the abyssal plains toward the distant surface, the ocean continues to guard its secrets with the same indifference it has shown for millions of years. The collision that nearly claimed USS San Francisco was just one moment in the eternal conversation between human ambition and oceanic mystery, a conversation that the sea always seems destined to win. Story 15. The Her Majesty's Australian Ship, AE-1 Pioneer's End. From the modern Pacific, where GPS satellites and advanced sonar failed to prevent disaster, we journey back to the dawn of submarine warfare, when these underwater vessels were still experimental machines, operated by pioneering crews who were writing the rules of subsurface navigation as they went along. This is the story of Australia's first submarine, a vessel that represented a nation's entry into the underwater warfare club, only to vanish in waters that would keep her secrets for over a century. In the tropical waters off New Guinea, where World War I was being fought in distant corners of the Pacific, Her Majesty's Australian ship AE-1 would become Australia's first submarine loss, and one of her most enduring naval mysteries. The first in the lost. September 14th, 1914. The azure waters off New Guinea shimmered under the tropical sun, their beauty masking the deadly game of war being played out across the Pacific. World War I had erupted just weeks earlier, and the conflict was spreading to remote corners of the globe where European powers had established colonial outposts. In these waters, Australia was conducting its first independent naval operations, using the most advanced technology available to project power across the vast Pacific. At the center of these operations was Her Majesty's Australian ship AE-1, Australia's first submarine, and a symbol of the young nation's naval ambitions. Her Majesty's Australian ship AE-1 represented more than just a warship. She was proof that Australia could operate the most sophisticated military technology of the age. Submarines were still relatively new weapons in 1914, mysterious and dangerous machines that few navies had mastered. For Australia, a nation defined by its relationship with the sea, the ability to operate submarines was a crucial step toward naval independence. The submarine's design reflected the cutting-edge technology of the early 20th century. Built in Britain to Australian specifications, she incorporated the latest advances in underwater propulsion, navigation, and weapons systems. Her electric motors could drive her silently through the depths, while her torpedoes gave her the ability to sink even the largest enemy vessels with a single well-placed shot. Her crew of 35 was carefully selected from volunteers who understood they were pioneering a new form of warfare. These men were not just sailors, they were explorers venturing into an environment where human beings had never operated before. Every dive was an experiment, every mission, a test of both technology and courage. The mission that would claim AE-1 was part of Australia's campaign to capture German colonies in the Pacific. The submarine was operating in support of surface forces attempting to secure German New Guinea, providing reconnaissance and protection against enemy naval forces that might threaten the invasion fleet. On the morning of September 14th, Her Majesty's Australian ship AE-1 departed from her base to conduct a patrol in the waters off New Guinea. The mission was considered routine by the standards of early submarine warfare. Patrol a designated area, report on enemy activity, and engage targets of opportunity if they presented themselves. It was the kind of mission that submarines would perform thousands of times during the war, but for AE-1, it would be her last. The submarine was scheduled to return to base by evening, but darkness fell without any sign of her return. Initially, this wasn't cause for immediate alarm. Early submarines had limited communication capabilities, and operational delays were common as crews learned to handle their complex and temperamental vessels. But as hours turned into days without any contact from AE-1, it became clear that something had gone wrong. The Royal Australian Navy launched search operations, but the waters off New Guinea were vast and largely uncharted. Finding a missing submarine in such an environment was like searching for a needle in an oceanic haystack. The search continued for weeks, involving both Australian and British naval forces. Aircraft were deployed to scan the surface for any sign of wreckage or survivors, while surface vessels combed the patrol areas where AE-1 was last known to be operating. But the Pacific Ocean had swallowed Australia's first submarine as completely as if she had never existed. Years passed, then decades, as the mystery of Her Majesty's Australian ship AE-1's disappearance became part of Australian naval folklore. Theories about her fate ranged from enemy action to mechanical failure to navigational error, but without any physical evidence, they remained nothing more than speculation. The submarine had become a ghost, a reminder of the dangers faced by those who dared to venture beneath the waves in the early days of submarine warfare. It would be 103 years before Her Majesty's Australian ship AE-1 was finally found. The discovery of the wreck in 2017 was the result of a joint Australian-Papua New Guinea search effort using modern underwater search technology. The submarine was located in deep water off the coast of New Guinea, her hull resting on the seabed in remarkably good condition considering her century-long submersion. The wreck told a story of sudden disaster. AE-1 appeared to have sunk rapidly, with no evidence of the kind of damage that would result from enemy action or explosive decompression. The submarine's hull was intact, her hatches were closed, and there were no signs of the desperate attempts to escape that might be expected if the crew had time to react to an emergency. The evidence suggested that Her Majesty's Australian ship AE-1 had suffered a catastrophic failure that caused her to sink rapidly to the bottom. But what had caused this failure remained a mystery. Early submarines were notorious for their mechanical problems and design flaws, but AE-1 had been operating successfully for months before her loss. Several theories emerged to explain the submarine's fate. The most plausible centered on the dangerous nature of early submarine technology. These vessels operated at the very limits of what was technically possible in 1914, with systems that were barely understood even by their designers. A failure in any critical system, ballast tanks, electrical circuits, or hull integrity, could doom the entire vessel. Another possibility was that AE-1 had encountered environmental conditions that her designers had never anticipated. The waters off New Guinea were known for their unusual characteristics, including extreme depths, underwater currents, and geological instability. A submarine designed for operation in European waters might have been vulnerable to conditions that existed only in the tropical Pacific. The most intriguing theory involved the submarine's diving procedures. Early submarines had to be carefully balanced to maintain proper trim while submerged, a delicate process that required precise coordination between crew members. If something had gone wrong during a routine dive, if ballast had shifted unexpectedly, or if diving planes had jammed, the submarine could have plunged beyond her safe operating depth and been crushed by water pressure. The discovery of AE-1's wreck also revealed details about early submarine construction and operation that had been lost to history. The preservation of the submarine in deep, cold water had maintained many features that would have decayed in shallower environments, providing insights into the technology and procedures of the submarine's era. For Australia, the discovery of Her Majesty's Australian ship AE-1 provided closure to one of the nation's oldest military mysteries. The submarine had been the first vessel lost by the Royal Australian Navy, and her disappearance had cast a shadow over Australia's early submarine program. Finding her wreck allowed the families of her crew members to finally know where their ancestors had died, and provided a focal point for remembering their sacrifice. The loss of AE-1 had significant implications for Australia's naval development. The submarine's disappearance highlighted the extreme dangers of early submarine operations and led to increased emphasis on safety procedures and crew training. The lessons learned from her loss would influence Australian submarine design and operation for decades to come. The mystery of what exactly caused Her Majesty's Australian ship AE-1 to sink may never be completely solved. The passage of more than a century has made detailed forensic analysis difficult, and many of the technological details of early submarine operation have been lost to time. But the submarine's discovery has provided valuable insights into the challenges faced by the pioneers of underwater warfare. The story of Her Majesty's Australian ship AE-1 represents more than just a naval disaster. It's a testament to the courage of the men who volunteered to operate technology that was barely understood and often unreliable. These submarine pioneers knew they were risking their lives every time they submerged, but they were willing to accept those risks in service of their country and in the advancement of naval science. In the depths off New Guinea, where Her Majesty's Australian ship AE-1 rests in eternal silence, the waters continue their ancient rhythms, indifferent to the human drama that unfolded a century ago. The submarine has become a monument to Australian naval history and a reminder of the price paid by those who dared to be first in exploring the ocean's depths. The legacy of AE-1 extends far beyond her tragic end. The submarine's loss taught valuable lessons about underwater operations that helped save countless lives in later conflicts. Her crew's sacrifice contributed to the development of safer submarine designs and procedures that would serve Australia's Navy throughout the 20th century and beyond. Today, as Australia continues to operate some of the world's most advanced submarines, the memory of Her Majesty's Australian ship AE-1 serves as a reminder of how far submarine technology has advanced and of the brave men who paid the ultimate price to make that advancement possible. Story 16. The USSS Five-Valve Catastrophe. From the pioneering days of submarine warfare in the Pacific, we return to the waters off the American coast, where the U.S. Navy was conducting its own experiments with underwater technology. This is the story of a submarine disaster that occurred not in the heat of battle or the hostile waters of a foreign coast, but during a routine test dive in familiar waters where rescue should have been certain and survival assured. Yet, even in the safest possible conditions, the ocean found a way to transform routine into catastrophe through the failure of a single, seemingly insignificant component: the fatal valve. September 1st, 1920. The Atlantic Ocean off Delaware sparkled under the early autumn sun, its relatively calm waters providing ideal conditions for submarine testing and training operations. USS S-5, one of the Navy's newest submarines, was conducting a routine dive test in these familiar waters, her crew confident in their vessel's capabilities and the safety protocols that governed such operations. The submarine represented the latest evolution in American underwater technology, incorporating lessons learned from World War I and advances in submarine design that promised to make underwater operations safer and more reliable than ever before. But reliability is a concept that the ocean seems determined to challenge at every opportunity. USS S-5 was part of the S-class submarine program, an ambitious effort to build a fleet of modern submarines capable of defending American coastal waters and projecting power across the world's oceans. These submarines incorporated the most advanced technology available to the Navy, with improved safety systems, more reliable mechanical components, and enhanced crew protection features. The dive test being conducted that September day was a standard procedure designed to verify the submarine's systems and crew proficiency. It was the kind of test that submarines performed routinely without incident, a controlled exercise in familiar waters, with rescue vessels standing by in case of emergency. The test began normally, with the submarine's crew executing the complex sequence of procedures required to take their vessel beneath the surface. Ballast tanks were flooded, diving planes were adjusted, and the submarine began her descent into the depths. Everything proceeded according to plan, with each system responding as expected, and the crew demonstrating their mastery of submarine operations. But somewhere in the intricate network of valves, pipes, and controls that govern the submarine's operation, a single component was about to fail in a way that would transform routine into disaster. The problem manifested itself through what appeared to be a minor malfunction in one of the submarine's air intake valves. This valve was designed to allow air to enter the submarine during surface operations, while sealing automatically when the vessel submerged. It was a critical component, but not one that typically caused serious problems. On this particular day, the valve failed to close properly when the submarine submerged. Instead of sealing tightly against the ocean's pressure, it began to leak, allowing seawater to enter the submarine at an alarming rate. What had started as a minor technical issue quickly escalated into a life-threatening emergency, as water poured into the vessel faster than her pumps could remove it. The crew's response was immediate and professional. They executed emergency procedures designed to deal with flooding, attempting to isolate the damaged area and regain control of their vessel's buoyancy. But the volume of water entering through the failed valve was overwhelming their ability to control it, and the submarine continued to sink deeper into the Atlantic. As USS S-5 descended past her safe operating depth, the crew faced the terrifying reality that their routine test dive had become a fight for survival. The submarine's hull began to creak and groan under the increasing water pressure, while the crew worked desperately to stop the flooding and regain control of their vessel. The emergency blow procedures that should have brought the submarine to the surface seemed to have no effect. The weight of water that had entered the submarine was preventing her from rising, despite the crew's frantic efforts to empty her ballast tanks and restore positive buoyancy. The submarine was trapped in a death spiral toward the ocean floor. What made the situation particularly mystifying was that the valve failure seemed to be far more catastrophic than such a malfunction should have been. Modern submarine design included multiple backup systems and redundant safety features, specifically to prevent this kind of single-point failure from dooming the entire vessel. Yet somehow, the failure of one valve had cascaded into a situation that threatened the entire submarine and crew. The investigation that followed would reveal troubling questions about both the valve's design and the submarine's emergency response systems. The valve that had failed was of a standard design that had been used successfully on numerous other submarines. There was no obvious reason why it should have failed so catastrophically on USS S5, nor why the failure should have been so difficult to contain. More puzzling still was the apparent ineffectiveness of the submarine's emergency procedures. The crew was well trained and had executed the correct responses to the flooding, yet their efforts seemed to have little impact on the submarine's predicament. This suggested either that the emergency systems themselves were flawed, or that the nature of the valve failure had created conditions that the designers had never anticipated. The rescue of USS S5's crew became a dramatic demonstration of both the dangers of submarine operations and the courage of those who risk their lives to save others. Despite being trapped in a sinking submarine, most of the crew was eventually rescued through the heroic efforts of surface vessels and other submarines that responded to the emergency. But the near loss of the submarine raised serious questions about submarine design and safety protocols. If a routine test dive in ideal conditions could come so close to disaster due to the failure of a single valve, what did that say about the safety of submarine operations in general? The investigation revealed that the valve failure had been caused by a combination of factors that individually seemed minor, but together had created a catastrophic situation. The valve sealing mechanism had deteriorated due to normal wear and tear, but this deterioration had gone undetected during routine inspections. When subjected to the pressure differential created during the dive, the weakened seal had failed completely. But this explanation only deepened the mystery. Why had routine inspection procedures failed to detect the valve's deterioration? The Navy's maintenance protocols were designed specifically to identify such problems before they could cause failures. The fact that they had missed a potentially catastrophic weakness suggested that there might be fundamental flaws in how submarine components were inspected and maintained. The incident also highlighted the cascade effect that could occur when multiple systems interacted in unexpected ways. The valve failure had not only caused flooding, but had also affected the submarine's trim and stability in ways that made recovery more difficult. The submarine's designers had apparently not fully considered how the failure of one system might impact the effectiveness of others. USS S5 was eventually raised and repaired, going on to serve successfully for many years. But the lessons learned from her near disaster led to significant changes in submarine design and operating procedures. New inspection protocols were developed to better detect component wear, and emergency systems were redesigned to be more effective in dealing with cascading failures. The incident served as a wake-up call for the submarine community, demonstrating that even the most routine operations could become dangerous when equipment failed in unexpected ways. The near loss of USS S5 led to a greater emphasis on redundancy in submarine design and more comprehensive training for submarine crews. Perhaps most importantly, the incident illustrated the critical role that individual components play in submarine safety. The failure of a single valve, a component that cost just a few dollars and seemed almost insignificant in the context of a multi-million-dollar submarine, had nearly caused the loss of the entire vessel and crew. The story of USS S5's near disaster serves as a reminder that in the underwater world, there are no truly minor components or routine operations. Every valve, every seal, every procedure carries with it the potential for catastrophe if something goes wrong. The ocean's hostile environment ensures that even the smallest failure can escalate into a life-threatening emergency with frightening speed. Today, modern submarines incorporate lessons learned from incidents like the USS S5 valve failure. Advanced materials, better inspection techniques, and more sophisticated emergency systems have made such disasters less likely. But the fundamental truth revealed by S5's experience remains unchanged. In the depths where pressure reigns supreme and rescue is often impossible, the margin for error disappears entirely. The valve that nearly doomed USS S5 has long since been replaced and forgotten, but its failure continues to influence submarine design and operation nearly a century later. In the eternal struggle between human engineering and oceanic hostility, every lesson learned in blood and seawater becomes part of the knowledge that keeps future submariners alive in the crushing depths of the deep. Story 17. The Pakistani naval ship, Ghazi War Mystery. From the peacetime testing grounds off Delaware, we venture into the heated crucible of armed conflict, where submarines become weapons of war rather than subjects of experimentation. This is the story of a submarine that vanished during one of the most intense naval conflicts of the modern era, her loss shrouded in the fog of war, and competing national narratives that have never been reconciled. In the Bay of Bengal, where the Indo-Pakistani War was reaching its climax, the ocean would claim another submarine in circumstances that remain disputed to this day. The Warrior's End. December 1971. The Bay of Bengal churned under monsoon skies, its dark waters reflecting the storm clouds of war that had engulfed the Indian subcontinent. The Indo-Pakistani conflict was reaching its decisive phase, with naval forces from both nations engaged in deadly combat across the region's strategic waterways. In these hostile waters, where every ship was a potential enemy and every shadow might conceal a submarine, Pakistani naval ship Ghazi was conducting one of the most dangerous missions of her career. She would never complete it. Pakistani naval ship Ghazi was Pakistan's premier submarine, a former U.S. Navy vessel that had been transferred to the Pakistani Navy and modernized for operations in South Asian waters. She represented Pakistan's underwater warfare capabilities and served as a symbol of the nation's naval ambitions in the strategically crucial Indian Ocean region. The submarine's mission during the 1971 war was both critical and perilous: to penetrate Indian naval defenses and attack high-value targets in one of India's most heavily defended ports. It was the kind of mission that could change the course of the war if successful, but that carried enormous risks for the submarine and her crew. Visakhapatnam, the target of Ghazi's mission, was one of India's most important naval bases and home to significant portions of the Indian Navy's fleet. The port was heavily defended with anti-submarine weapons, patrol vessels, and sophisticated detection equipment designed to prevent exactly the kind of attack that Ghazi was attempting. For the Pakistani submarine to succeed, she would need to penetrate these defenses undetected, position herself for an attack, and escape before Indian forces could respond. It was a mission that required not only courage, but also exceptional skill, and no small amount of luck. On the night of December 4th, 1971, something went catastrophically wrong. The Indian Navy reported that their destroyer, Indian naval ship Rajput, had detected and engaged a hostile submarine near Visakhapatnam, dropping depth charges that resulted in the destruction of the intruder. According to Indian accounts, the submarine had been caught attempting to penetrate the port's defenses and had been sunk after a brief but decisive engagement. But Pakistan disputed this version of events, claiming that Pakistani naval ship Ghazi had been lost due to an internal explosion rather than enemy action. According to Pakistani sources, the submarine had suffered a catastrophic malfunction, possibly involving her torpedo systems or fuel storage, that had caused her to explode and sink without any involvement from Indian forces. Both versions of events were supported by evidence that seemed convincing to their respective proponents, but was disputed by the other side. The Indian Navy produced sonar recordings and witness testimony that they claimed proved their destroyer had successfully attacked and sunk the Pakistani submarine. Pakistani investigators pointed to the nature of the wreckage and the pattern of debris as evidence that the submarine had been destroyed by internal explosion rather than external attack. The truth, like the submarine herself, remained buried beneath the waters of the Bay of Bengal. When the wreck of Pakistani naval ship Ghazi was eventually located, it provided some answers but raised even more questions. The submarine showed extensive damage that was consistent with a massive explosion, but the source of that explosion remained unclear. The damage pattern could have been caused by either depth charges from an Indian warship or by an internal explosion involving the submarine's own weapons or fuel systems. The investigation was complicated by the political tensions between India and Pakistan, which made objective analysis of the evidence difficult. Both nations had strong incentives to support their preferred version of events. India wanted to demonstrate the effectiveness of their anti-submarine defenses, while Pakistan sought to avoid acknowledging that their premier submarine had been successfully hunted down and destroyed by enemy forces. The wartime context also meant that much of the evidence was classified or had been lost or destroyed during the conflict. Naval operations during wartime are conducted under conditions of extreme secrecy, with limited documentation and communication. This made it difficult to reconstruct exactly what had happened during Ghazi's final mission. Several theories emerged to explain the submarine's loss, each supported by different interpretations of the available evidence. The most straightforward explanation was that Indian naval ship Rajput had indeed detected and successfully attacked the Pakistani submarine, achieving one of the war's most significant anti-submarine victories. This theory was supported by Indian naval records that documented the destroyer's sonar contact and subsequent depth charge attack. The timing and location of the attack corresponded with the discovery of Ghazi's wreck, suggesting a direct causal relationship between the Indian attack and the submarine's loss. But Pakistani investigators argued that the evidence was consistent with an internal explosion that had occurred before any Indian attack. They pointed to the submarine's complex weapons systems and the dangerous nature of submarine operations as potential sources of the catastrophic failure that had destroyed the vessel. Modern submarine torpedoes contain powerful explosives and sophisticated propulsion systems that can be extremely dangerous if they malfunction. If one of Ghazi's torpedoes had exploded while still in its tube, the blast could have been sufficient to destroy the entire submarine. Similarly, fuel leaks or electrical malfunctions could have triggered fires or explosions that would have had similarly catastrophic results. Another possibility was that the submarine had fallen victim to a mine or other underwater explosive device. The waters around Visakhapatnam were heavily defended, and it was possible that Ghazi had encountered a mine that had been laid as part of the port's defensive systems. This would explain the massive explosion that had destroyed the submarine, while avoiding the question of whether Indian forces had directly engaged the intruder. The most intriguing theory involved the possibility of sabotage. Submarine operations during wartime create enormous stress on both equipment and personnel, and there had been instances in other conflicts where internal problems had led to submarine losses. If someone aboard Ghazi had deliberately triggered an explosion, it would explain both the catastrophic nature of the damage and the absence of clear evidence pointing to external attack. The loss of Pakistani naval ship Ghazi had significant implications for the broader Indo-Pakistani conflict. The submarine represented a major portion of Pakistan's naval striking power, and her destruction eliminated Pakistan's ability to threaten Indian naval operations in the Bay of Bengal. The psychological impact was equally important. The loss of their premier submarine was a devastating blow to Pakistani naval morale. For India, the sinking of Ghazi became a symbol of naval superiority and effective anti-submarine warfare. Whether the submarine had been destroyed by Indian action or had fallen victim to internal problems, her loss demonstrated that Pakistan's underwater threat could be neutralized. This allowed Indian naval forces to operate more freely in the crucial final phases of the war. The conflicting accounts of Ghazi's loss also highlighted the challenges of conducting accurate historical research in the aftermath of armed conflict. Both sides had political and military reasons to present their preferred version of events, making objective analysis extremely difficult. The truth often becomes a casualty of war, buried beneath layers of propaganda and national pride. The mystery surrounding Pakistani naval ship Ghazi's fate reflects broader questions about submarine warfare during the Cold War era. Many submarine operations from this period remain classified or poorly documented, leaving historians to piece together events from incomplete and often contradictory sources. The underwater battlefield was a shadowy realm where victories and defeats were often known only to those who participated in them. For the families of Ghazi's crew, the conflicting accounts of the submarine's loss added an extra dimension of tragedy to their grief. Not only had they lost their loved ones, but they were left with competing explanations of how and why those deaths had occurred. The uncertainty made it difficult to find closure or to properly honor the sacrifice of those who had died. The wreck of Pakistani naval ship Ghazi remains on the bottom of the Bay of Bengal, a silent witness to the events that claimed her. The submarine has become a monument to the sailors who died in her hull and a reminder of the deadly nature of underwater warfare. But she has also become a symbol of how war can obscure truth, creating mysteries that may never be fully resolved. The debate over what really happened to Pakistani naval ship Ghazi continues to this day, with historians and naval experts still arguing over the evidence and its interpretation. New information occasionally emerges, but much of it only adds to the complexity of the mystery rather than resolving it definitively. In the depths of the Bay of Bengal, where monsoon currents swirl around the wreck of the Pakistani submarine, the waters keep their secrets about what really happened on that December night in 1971. The ocean, indifferent to human conflict and national pride, has become the final arbiter of a mystery that may never be solved to everyone's satisfaction. The story of Pakistani naval ship Ghazi serves as a reminder that even in an age of advanced technology and comprehensive documentation, the truth about military operations can remain elusive. In the underwater world, where submarines operate in secrecy and stealth, the line between victory and defeat, between enemy action and mechanical failure, can be as murky as the depths themselves. The submarine's legacy extends beyond the circumstances of her loss to encompass the broader questions about submarine warfare, national security, and the fog of war that obscures truth in favor of convenient narratives. In the end, Pakistani naval ship Ghazi became more than just a warship. She became a symbol of how the ocean's depths can swallow not only ships and lives, but also the truth itself. Story 18. The S-363, Whiskey on the Rocks. From the disputed waters of the Bay of Bengal, we journey to the icy shores of Scandinavia, where the Cold War's underwater tensions reached their most dramatic peak, in an incident that combines submarine mystery with international crisis. This is the story of a Soviet submarine that surfaced in one of the most embarrassing and mysterious circumstances of the entire Cold War era. In the archipelago waters of Sweden, where neutral territory met superpower rivalry, a single submarine would create a diplomatic incident that exposed the hidden world of underwater espionage and raised questions about submarine navigation that remain unanswered to this day. The Uninvited Guest. October 27th, 1981. The Baltic Sea lay calm under the pale autumn sky, its waters reflecting the changing colors of the Scandinavian forests that line the Swedish coast. This was neutral territory, carefully maintained by Sweden's policy of non-alignment during the Cold War. But neutrality is a fragile concept when submarines prowl beneath the surface, carrying the secret wars of the superpowers into supposedly peaceful waters. On this particular morning, the residents of Karlskrona were about to witness one of the most spectacular submarine incidents of the modern era. Soviet submarine S-363, a Whiskey-class diesel-electric vessel, had somehow managed to navigate through the complex archipelago waters of the Swedish coast and run aground on a rocky outcrop less than 6 miles from Sweden's most sensitive naval base. The submarine was not only in Swedish territorial waters, she was practically on Sweden's doorstep, stranded like a beached whale in full view of anyone who cared to look. The incident, which would quickly be dubbed Whiskey on the Rocks by the international media, created an immediate diplomatic crisis and raised profound questions about what the Soviet submarine had been doing in Swedish waters. S-363 was a veteran submarine of the Soviet Navy's Baltic Fleet, designed for coastal operations and patrol missions in the relatively shallow waters of the Baltic Sea. Her crew was experienced in Baltic operations, familiar with the complex currents, depths, and navigational challenges that characterize this enclosed sea. These were not novice submariners lost in unfamiliar waters. They were specialists operating in their home territory, which made their presence on Swedish rocks all the more mysterious. The Soviet explanation for the incident was straightforward but difficult to believe. The submarine had suffered a navigational error that had led her into Swedish waters by mistake. According to Soviet officials, a combination of compass malfunction and poor weather had caused the crew to become disoriented, leading them to surface in what they believed were international waters. But the Swedish government and Western intelligence agencies found this explanation highly suspicious. The waters where S-363 had run aground were deep within Swedish territorial limits, requiring the submarine to have traveled for miles through restricted areas before reaching her final position. For experienced Baltic Fleet submariners to make such a massive navigational error seemed almost impossible. More troubling still was the submarine's proximity to Sweden's Karlskrona naval base, one of the most sensitive military installations in Scandinavia. The base housed much of Sweden's submarine fleet and served as a center for anti-submarine warfare training. For a Soviet submarine to end up practically on the base's doorstep suggested either incredible incompetence or deliberate espionage. The Swedish response to the incident was swift and unprecedented. Swedish naval forces surrounded the stranded submarine, preventing any attempt at escape or rescue. Prime Minister Olof Palme publicly demanded an explanation from the Soviet Union, and insisted that Swedish officials be allowed to inspect the submarine before it would be permitted to leave Swedish waters. This demand created an enormous diplomatic crisis. The Soviet Union had never allowed foreign officials to inspect one of their submarines, and S-363 contained classified equipment and documents that they desperately wanted to keep secret. But with the submarine stranded on Swedish rocks and surrounded by Swedish warships, they had little choice but to negotiate. The standoff that followed lasted for 10 days, during which the submarine became the focus of intense international attention. Journalists from around the world descended on the quiet Swedish coastline, while diplomats in Moscow and Stockholm worked frantically to resolve the crisis without triggering a larger confrontation. For the crew of S-363, trapped aboard their submarine in full view of Swedish forces, the situation was deeply humiliating. These were professional naval officers who had dedicated their careers to maintaining the secrecy and effectiveness of Soviet submarine operations. Now, they found themselves the center of a media circus, their submarine and mission exposed to international scrutiny. The Swedish inspection of the submarine, when it finally occurred, revealed troubling details about Soviet submarine capabilities and intentions. While Swedish officials remained diplomatically silent about exactly what they found, it was clear that S-363 was equipped for intelligence gathering rather than simple patrol operations. The submarine's sophisticated electronic equipment and the nature of her crew's training suggested that she had been conducting surveillance operations against Swedish and North Atlantic Treaty Organization, also known as NATO, naval forces. The location where she ran aground provided an ideal position for monitoring communications and tracking the movements of Swedish submarines entering and leaving Karlskrona. But this only deepened the mystery of how such a sophisticated intelligence-gathering platform had ended up stranded on Swedish rocks. If S-363 had been conducting a carefully planned espionage mission, how had her crew made such a catastrophic navigational error? The submarine's advanced navigation equipment should have prevented such a basic mistake. Several theories emerged to explain the incident, each more intriguing than the last. The most conventional explanation suggested that the submarine had indeed suffered a genuine navigational failure, possibly involving multiple system malfunctions that had left the crew disoriented and unable to determine their true position. But Western intelligence agencies suspected a more sinister explanation. Some theorists proposed that S-363 had been deliberately run aground as part of a complex Soviet intelligence operation designed to test Swedish response capabilities and gather information about Swedish anti-submarine defenses. According to this theory, the submarine's crew had been ordered to allow themselves to be captured in order to observe Swedish naval procedures and equipment firsthand. The apparent navigational error had been a cover story designed to hide the true nature of the mission. Another possibility was that the submarine had been involved in a more complex intelligence operation that had gone wrong. If S-363 had been attempting to deploy listening devices or retrieve previously placed equipment, she might have been operating in shallow water where navigation was particularly challenging. A small error in such conditions could have led to the grounding. The most disturbing theory involved the possibility that the incident had been caused by defection or sabotage. If someone aboard the submarine had deliberately caused the grounding in order to escape to the west or expose Soviet submarine operations, it would explain both the mysterious navigational failure and the crew's apparent inability to prevent the incident. The Soviet investigation into the incident remained classified, but the fact that several crew members were reportedly disciplined or transferred suggested that the official explanation of simple navigational error was incomplete. The Soviet Navy's response indicated that they believed the incident could have been prevented, which contradicted their public claims about unavoidable equipment failure. The international implications of the Whiskey on the Rocks incident extended far beyond the immediate diplomatic crisis. The incident exposed the extent of Soviet submarine operations in supposedly neutral waters and highlighted the vulnerability of coastal nations to underwater surveillance and potential attack. For Sweden, the incident marked a turning point in their approach to submarine intrusions. The government implemented new policies for dealing with foreign submarines in Swedish waters and significantly enhanced their anti-submarine capabilities. The quiet neutrality that had characterized Swedish Cold War policy was replaced by a more assertive defense of territorial integrity. The incident also had significant implications for submarine operations worldwide. The international attention focused on S-363's grounding made it clear that submarine activities that had previously been conducted in secrecy could suddenly become public knowledge, with potentially devastating consequences for international relations. For the crew of S-363, the incident marked the end of their careers in submarine warfare. The submarine's captain and several other officers were reportedly removed from their positions and transferred to other duties. The humiliation of having their submarine become an international laughingstock was a price that the Soviet Navy was not willing to ignore. The submarine herself was eventually freed from the Swedish rocks and allowed to return to Soviet waters, but not before the incident had fundamentally changed the nature of Baltic submarine operations. The Whiskey on the Rocks affair had shown that even the most secret submarine missions could be exposed to international scrutiny if something went wrong. Today, more than 4 decades after the incident, the true nature of S-363's mission remains classified. The submarine has long since been decommissioned, and many of the key participants in the incident have died. But the mystery of what really happened in Swedish waters that October morning continues to fascinate intelligence analysts and submarine historians. The incident serves as a reminder that in the underwater world of submarine operations, the line between success and catastrophic failure can be measured in meters rather than miles. A single navigational error, whether genuine or deliberate, had transformed a secret intelligence mission into an international incident that exposed the hidden world of Cold War submarine warfare to unprecedented public scrutiny. In the clear waters of the Swedish archipelago, where S-363 ran aground in full view of the world, the incident became a symbol of how quickly submarine operations could shift from secrecy to embarrassment. The ocean had claimed another submarine mystery, but this time the mystery involved not the loss of a vessel, but the exposure of secrets that were meant to remain forever hidden beneath the waves. Story 19. The AS-28 Entanglement Mystery. From the diplomatic embarrassment of Swedish waters, we venture to the remote reaches of the Pacific, where modern Russia was conducting submarine operations in some of the world's most challenging and secretive waters. This is the story of a rescue submarine that became the subject of a rescue itself, trapped by forces that defied explanation and held captive by the ocean in circumstances that remain mysterious to this day. Off the Kamchatka Peninsula, where volcanic islands rise from abyssal depths and military secrecy shrouds normal operations, a submarine designed to save lives would find itself fighting for survival in ways its designers never imagined. The rescuer trapped. August 5th, 2005. The waters off Kamchatka Peninsula churned under gray skies, their dark surface hiding one of the most geologically active underwater environments on Earth. This remote corner of the Pacific was a place where submarine operations were conducted under conditions of extreme secrecy, far from the prying eyes of international observers. Here, the Russian Navy conducted training exercises and equipment tests that were crucial to maintaining their underwater capabilities. But on this particular day, the ocean had prepared a trap for one of Russia's most sophisticated rescue vessels. AS-28 was a modern rescue submarine, a marvel of specialized engineering designed to save the lives of submariners trapped in disabled vessels on the ocean floor. Her advanced life support systems, precision maneuvering capabilities, and sophisticated rescue equipment made her one of the most capable submarine rescue vehicles in the world. Ironically, these same capabilities would prove insufficient when AS-28 herself became trapped in circumstances that no rescue manual had ever anticipated. The rescue submarine was conducting routine operations in the waters off Kamchatka, participating in naval exercises that tested both equipment and crew proficiency in submarine rescue operations. The mission was considered standard for a vessel of AS-28's capabilities, practice maneuvers in moderately deep water that would prepare the crew for actual rescue missions. But at a depth of 190 meters, something went catastrophically wrong. AS-28 became entangled in what Russian officials described as cables or nets, though the exact nature of these obstructions was never clearly explained. The rescue submarine, designed to navigate precisely around disabled vessels and their associated debris, found herself unable to free herself from whatever had trapped her on the ocean floor. The irony was devastating. A submarine specifically designed to rescue others had become trapped herself, leaving her crew facing the same kind of emergency that they had trained to resolve for other submariners. The rescue submarine had become the victim. The crew's initial attempts to free their vessel were unsuccessful. Standard procedures for dealing with entanglement, reverse propulsion, careful maneuvering, and emergency ballast operations proved ineffective against whatever was holding AS-28 captive. The submarine remained firmly trapped on the bottom, her crew's situation becoming more desperate with each passing hour. Russian naval forces responded immediately to AS-28's predicament, but their rescue efforts were hampered by the same factors that had made Kamchatka an ideal location for secretive operations. The remote location, extreme depths, and harsh environmental conditions made rescue operations extraordinarily challenging. More troubling still was the mysterious nature of AS-28's entanglement. Russian officials were vague about exactly what had trapped the rescue submarine, describing the obstruction variously as fishing nets, underwater cables, or unspecified debris. This lack of clarity raised questions about what kind of equipment or installations might exist in the supposedly empty waters off Kamchatka. The rescue operation that followed became an international effort involving some of the world's most advanced underwater rescue technology. British and American rescue teams were eventually called in to assist the Russian operation, bringing with them remotely operated vehicles and cutting equipment specifically designed for complex underwater entanglements. But even with international assistance, the rescue proved extraordinarily difficult. The nature of AS-28's entanglement was unlike anything the rescue teams had encountered before. Whatever was holding the submarine seemed to resist conventional cutting techniques and appeared to be far more complex than simple fishing nets or cables. The rescue teams found themselves working in conditions that pushed their equipment and expertise to the absolute limits. The depth, the harsh environment, and the mysterious nature of the entanglement created challenges that no amount of training could have fully prepared them for. As the rescue operation continued, details about the incident remained frustratingly vague. Russian officials provided minimal information about the circumstances that had led to AS-28's entrapment, citing both operational security and the classified nature of the submarine's mission. This secrecy fueled speculation about what the rescue submarine had really been doing when she became trapped. Some theories suggested that AS-28 had encountered fishing equipment that had been abandoned or lost in the remote waters off Kamchatka. The area was known to be used by both legal and illegal fishing operations, and derelict nets or lines could potentially entangle even sophisticated submarines if encountered under the wrong conditions. But other theories pointed to more mysterious possibilities. The waters off Kamchatka were known to contain various types of military installations and equipment, some of which might not appear on any public charts. If AS-28 had encountered classified underwater installations or equipment, it would explain both the nature of her entanglement and the secrecy surrounding the incident. The most intriguing theory involved the possibility that the rescue submarine had become entangled in some kind of underwater surveillance or communication system. Such installations would be extremely sensitive from a national security perspective, which might explain the reluctance of Russian officials to provide detailed information about the incident. The successful rescue of AS-28's crew was eventually accomplished through a combination of advanced cutting equipment and precise underwater maneuvering. But the exact details of how the submarine was freed remained as mysterious as the circumstances that had trapped her in the first place. The incident highlighted several troubling aspects of modern submarine operations. First, it demonstrated that even the most advanced rescue submarines could encounter situations that their designers had never anticipated. The sophisticated equipment and training that made AS-28 capable of rescuing other submarines proved insufficient when she herself became trapped. Second, the incident exposed the challenges of conducting rescue operations in remote, environmentally harsh locations. The waters off Kamchatka represented some of the most difficult operating conditions on Earth, where even minor problems could escalate into life-threatening emergencies. Perhaps most importantly, the AS-28 incident illustrated the ongoing secrecy that surrounds submarine operations, even in situations where transparency might actually enhance safety. The vague and contradictory explanations provided by Russian officials made it difficult to understand what had really happened and how similar incidents might be prevented in the future. The crew of AS-28 was eventually rescued safely, but their ordeal served as a sobering reminder of the dangers faced by those who operate in the ocean's depths. The rescue submarine had been designed to save lives, but she had nearly become another victim of the sea's unpredictable and often hostile environment. The incident also raised questions about the adequacy of current submarine rescue capabilities. If a specialized rescue submarine could become trapped so completely that international assistance was required to free her, what did that say about the ability to rescue crews from conventional submarines that might encounter similar problems? For the submarine rescue community, the AS-28 incident became a case study in both the capabilities and limitations of modern rescue technology. The successful resolution of the crisis demonstrated that international cooperation could overcome even the most challenging underwater emergencies, but it also highlighted how quickly routine operations could become life-threatening situations. The mystery of what exactly trapped AS-28 on the bottom off Kamchatka may never be fully resolved. The classified nature of submarine operations in that region, combined with the ongoing secrecy surrounding the incident, means that many questions about the entanglement remain unanswered. But the incident serves as a powerful reminder that in the underwater world, even the most sophisticated technology and extensive training cannot eliminate all risks. The ocean's depths continue to present challenges that humble even our most advanced submarines and most experienced crews. In the dark waters off Kamchatka, where AS-28 fought for her life against invisible bonds, the sea demonstrated once again its power to transform routine operations into desperate struggles for survival. The rescue submarine's ordeal had ended safely, but it had also revealed new dimensions of vulnerability in the ongoing human effort to master the ocean's depths. The incident stands as a testament to both the courage of submarine crews who venture into hostile environments and the ingenuity of rescue teams who risk their own lives to save others. But it also serves as a reminder that beneath the waves, the margin between success and disaster can disappear as quickly as a submarine descending into the abyss. Story 20. The HMS Vandal Trials Tragedy. From the mysterious entanglements of the modern Pacific, we return to the wartime waters of Scotland, where the Royal Navy was pushing the boundaries of submarine technology in their desperate fight against the Axis powers. This is our final story, a tale that brings us full circle to the theme that has echoed through every submarine mystery we've explored: the ocean's absolute indifference to human ambition, and the razor-thin line between technological triumph and maritime tragedy. In the seemingly safe waters of the Scottish coast, where routine trials should have been as predictable as the tide, HMS Vandal would write the final chapter in our journey through submarine mysteries, a chapter that remains unfinished to this day. The Last Trial. February 24th, 1943. The waters off Inchmarnock, Scotland, lay grey and choppy under the wartime sky, their familiar patterns offering no hint of the tragedy that was about to unfold. HMS Vandal, a U-class submarine representing the latest evolution in British underwater warfare technology, was conducting what should have been a routine series of trials in these well-known waters. The submarine and her crew of 37 would never return from this final test. HMS Vandal embodied everything the Royal Navy had learned about submarine warfare during the darkest days of World War II. She was compact, efficient, and deadly, designed to operate in the confined waters around Britain, where German U-boats posed a constant threat to Allied shipping. Her trials off the Scottish coast were meant to validate the improvements and modifications that would make her even more effective against enemy forces. But the ocean had prepared a different kind of test entirely. The submarine was conducting trials in relatively shallow water, close enough to shore that rescue should have been straightforward if anything went wrong. These were not the hostile depths of enemy territory or the crushing pressures of the deep ocean. These were the familiar waters where British submarines had trained safely for decades. Yet somewhere in those familiar depths, HMS Vandal encountered forces that transformed routine into catastrophe. The first indication that something had gone wrong was the submarine's failure to surface at the scheduled time. Initially, this wasn't cause for immediate alarm. Trial schedules were often adjusted based on sea conditions or equipment performance. But as hours passed without any communication from Vandal, concern began to mount among the surface support vessels. The search for HMS Vandal began immediately, involving ships and aircraft that scoured the trial area for any sign of the missing submarine. But the Scottish waters, despite their relative familiarity, proved as capable of concealing secrets as any ocean depth. Days turned into weeks as the search continued without success. The submarine had vanished as completely as if she had never existed. It would be 51 years before HMS Vandal was finally located, her wreck discovered in 1994 by divers exploring the seabed off the Scottish coast. The discovery provided some answers about the submarine's fate, but it also raised new questions that would never be fully resolved. The wreck showed evidence of catastrophic flooding, suggesting that water had entered the submarine rapidly and overwhelmingly, but the source of this flooding remained mysterious. The submarine's hull appeared to be largely intact, ruling out the kind of structural failure or collision damage that might explain such rapid water ingress. The investigation into Vandal's loss considered multiple possible causes, but none provided a completely satisfactory explanation for what had happened in those final moments. The submarine might have suffered a valve failure similar to other incidents we've explored, but her systems were well maintained, and her crew was experienced in recognizing and responding to such problems. Human error was another possibility. Perhaps a critical mistake during the trials had led to flooding that the crew couldn't control. But the crew of HMS Vandal was highly trained and familiar with the procedures being tested. The kind of error that would cause catastrophic flooding seemed unlikely for such experienced submariners. More puzzling still was the apparent failure of the submarine's emergency systems. Modern submarines, even those of World War II vintage, were equipped with multiple backup systems designed to bring the vessel to the surface in case of emergency. Why had none of these systems functioned when Vandal needed them most? The shallow water where the trials were being conducted made the tragedy even more mysterious. At the depth where Vandal was found, the crew should have been able to escape using standard emergency procedures. The submarine's escape hatches should have functioned normally, and the relatively short distance to the surface should have made evacuation possible even under adverse conditions. Yet all 37 crew members had perished, apparently unable to escape from their stricken vessel. The wartime context of Vandal's loss added another layer of complexity to the investigation. Submarine technology was evolving rapidly during World War II, with new systems and procedures being implemented faster than they could be thoroughly tested. It's possible that Vandal was testing equipment or procedures that contained unknown flaws or dangers. The trials being conducted when Vandal was lost were never fully documented in surviving records, making it difficult to understand exactly what the submarine was doing when disaster struck. This lack of documentation has fueled speculation about whether the submarine might have been testing classified equipment or procedures that were considered too sensitive to record in detail. Some theories suggested that Vandal might have been testing new diving systems or ballast configurations that proved unstable under certain conditions. If the submarine had been pushed beyond her normal operating parameters during the trials, she might have encountered situations that her designers had never anticipated. Other investigators pointed to the possibility of equipment failure involving newly installed systems. Wartime modifications were often implemented quickly, sometimes without the extensive testing that would normally be required for submarine equipment. A failure in such systems could potentially have caused flooding that overwhelmed the submarine's ability to respond. The mystery of HMS Vandal's loss reflects many of the themes that have run through our exploration of submarine mysteries. Here was an advanced submarine, operated by an experienced crew, lost in familiar waters under circumstances that defied explanation. The tragedy demonstrated once again that in the underwater world, the margin between routine operation and catastrophic disaster could disappear without warning. The loss of HMS Vandal also highlighted the ongoing dangers faced by submarine crews, even during supposedly safe training operations. The submarine had been lost, not in combat against enemy forces, but during trials designed to improve her capabilities. The irony was bitter. A submarine designed to save lives in wartime had been claimed by the very trials meant to make her more effective. For the families of the 37 crew members, the loss was devastating and made worse by the lack of clear answers about what had happened. The long delay between the submarine's loss and the discovery of her wreck meant that many family members died without ever knowing the fate of their loved ones. The investigation into Vandal's loss led to changes in submarine trial procedures and safety protocols, but the fundamental questions about her fate remained unanswered. The Royal Navy's official conclusion was that the submarine had been lost due to flooding from an unknown source, but this explanation provided little comfort to those seeking to understand the tragedy. Today, HMS Vandal rests on the seabed off Scotland, a tomb for 37 sailors and a reminder of the ocean's power to claim even the most advanced submarines. Her loss stands as the final chapter in our journey through submarine mysteries, a story that encompasses all the themes we've explored: technological ambition, human courage, and the sea's ultimate authority over both. The wreck has become a monument to the dangers faced by submariners throughout history, from the pioneering crews of early submarines to the highly trained specialists of modern nuclear vessels. Each of the 20 submarine mysteries we've explored tells a similar story of brave men and women who ventured into the ocean's depths knowing they might never return. These stories remind us that despite all our technological advances, the ocean remains an environment where the unexpected can still occur, where the most routine operations can become deadly emergencies, and where even our most sophisticated submarines are vulnerable to forces that we still don't fully understand. In the depths where HMS Vandal rests, alongside the USS Thresher, the Kursk, and all the other submarines we've encountered in our journey, the ocean keeps its eternal watch. These vessels have become part of the sea itself, their steel hulls slowly returning to the elements from which they came, their crews forever part of the ocean's vast and mysterious realm. The submarine mysteries we've explored span more than a century of underwater warfare and exploration, from the primitive vessels of World War I to the nuclear-powered giants of the modern era. Each story is unique, yet all share common themes. The courage of those who venture beneath the waves, the limitations of human technology when faced with oceanic forces, and the sea's power to humble even our greatest achievements. As we surface from our journey through these 20 submarine mysteries, we're left with a profound appreciation for both the bravery of submarine crews and the ongoing mystery of the ocean itself. In the depths where these submarines rest, the sea continues its ancient rhythms, indifferent to human ambition yet somehow eternal in its capacity to inspire both awe and humility in those who dare to venture into its realm. The mysteries remain unsolved, the depths continue to call, and somewhere in the vast expanse of the world's oceans, new submarine stories are being written, stories that may someday join the collection of enigmas that have captivated our imaginations and reminded us of our small place in the ocean's immense and timeless domain. Story 21. The K278 Komsomolets Fire Mystery. From the wartime waters where HMS Vandal met her mysterious end, we journey to the final years of the Cold War, where the Soviet Union was pushing the absolute boundaries of submarine technology in their race to maintain underwater superiority. This is the story of the most advanced submarine the Soviets had ever built, a titanium-hulled marvel that could dive deeper than any submarine before her. Yet for all her technological supremacy, she would be destroyed, not by enemy action or crushing ocean pressure, but by the most primitive enemy of all, fire. The Deepest Fall. April 7th, 1989. The Norwegian Sea stretched gray and forbidding under the Arctic sky, its waters concealing the final act of the Cold War's underwater arms race. Far below the surface, at depths where few submarines dared to venture, K278 Komsomolets was conducting a routine patrol mission that showcased the pinnacle of Soviet submarine technology. She was unlike any submarine that had ever been built, a one-of-a-kind experimental vessel that represented the Soviet Union's most ambitious underwater engineering project. K278 Komsomolets was a submarine of superlatives. Her titanium hull allowed her to dive deeper than any military submarine before or since, reaching depths of over 1,000 meters, where the crushing pressure would destroy conventional vessels. Her nuclear reactor was among the most advanced ever installed in a submarine, providing virtually unlimited underwater endurance. Her weapons systems included experimental torpedoes that could strike targets at unprecedented ranges. She was quite literally the submarine of the future, or so her designers believed. The Komsomolets represented more than just technological achievement. She embodied the Soviet Union's determination to maintain underwater superiority, despite growing economic pressures. Built at enormous cost and incorporating technologies that pushed the limits of materials science, she was proof that Soviet engineering could still compete with Western innovations. But on this April morning in the Norwegian Sea, the future would collide with the most ancient enemy known to submariners. The fire that would claim the Komsomolets began in the submarine's aft compartments, in an area housing critical electrical systems and life support equipment. At first, it seemed like a minor problem, the kind of small electrical fire that submarines occasionally experience and crews routinely extinguish. The submarine's advanced firefighting systems should have contained the blaze quickly and efficiently. Instead, the fire spread with a ferocity that defied explanation. Within minutes, what had started as a localized electrical problem had become a raging inferno that consumed entire compartments. The flames moved through the submarine with a speed that shocked even experienced firefighters, overwhelming safety systems that were supposed to be state-of-the-art. The crew of the Komsomolets found themselves fighting a battle they were losing from the moment it began. Despite their training and the submarine's advanced firefighting equipment, they could not contain the spreading flames. Worse still, the fire was generating toxic smoke that made entire sections of the submarine uninhabitable. As the fire raged, it began to affect the submarine's most critical systems. Electrical circuits failed one by one, plunging sections of the vessel into darkness. Life support systems struggled to provide breathable air as smoke filled compartment after compartment. The nuclear reactor, though protected by multiple safety systems, became a source of concern as the fire threatened to reach critical control systems. The crew's struggle against the fire was heroic, but ultimately futile. The submarine's sophisticated systems, which should have given them every advantage in fighting the blaze, seemed to work against them instead. Automated systems that were supposed to contain fires appeared to malfunction, while manual firefighting equipment proved inadequate against the intensity of the flames. Perhaps most mysteriously, the fire seemed to be feeding on the submarine's own advanced technology. The titanium hull that made the Komsomolets so capable of withstanding ocean pressure may have actually contributed to the fire's intensity, as the metal conducted heat throughout the submarine structure. Advanced electrical systems that normally provided redundancy and safety became pathways for the fire to spread. As conditions aboard the submarine deteriorated beyond the crew's ability to control, the decision was made to emergency surface. The Komsomolets broke through the Norwegian sea's surface, trailing smoke and flames, her advanced stealth capabilities now useless, as she fought for survival in full view of any observers. The surface offered little relief from the submarine's ordeal. The fire continued to rage despite the crew's desperate efforts, and it became clear that the Komsomolets was doomed. The order was given to abandon ship, but even this proved more difficult than anyone had anticipated. The submarine's advanced systems, designed to keep her crews safe in the deepest waters, became obstacles to evacuation. Emergency escape systems that worked perfectly in testing failed under the stress of real emergency conditions. The very sophistication that made the Komsomolets so capable also made her more complex to abandon when everything went wrong. Of the 69 crew members aboard, 42 would die in the disaster. Some were claimed by the fire itself, others by the toxic smoke that filled the submarine. Still others died in the cold waters of the Norwegian Sea as they attempted to escape their burning vessel. The submarine that was supposed to represent the future of Soviet naval power had become a death trap for her own crew. The loss of the Komsomolets was devastating on multiple levels. The human cost was enormous. 42 skilled submariners, including some of the Soviet Navy's most experienced crew members, had died in a disaster that seemed preventable. The technological loss was equally significant. Years of research and development, along with billions of rubles in investment, disappeared beneath the Norwegian Sea. But perhaps most troubling of all was the mystery of why the disaster had occurred in the first place. The official Soviet investigation cited an electrical fault as the likely cause of the fire, but this explanation raised more questions than it answered. Why had a routine electrical problem escalated so quickly into a submarine-destroying inferno? The Komsomolets was equipped with the most advanced firefighting systems available to Soviet technology, systems that should have contained any electrical fire long before it could threaten the entire vessel. Several theories emerged to explain the catastrophic spread of the fire, each highlighting different aspects of the challenges involved in building such an advanced submarine. The most conventional explanation suggested that the submarine's electrical systems had suffered a cascading failure that overwhelmed the firefighting equipment's capacity to respond. But this theory struggled to explain why systems that had been extensively tested should fail so catastrophically during routine operations. The Komsomolets had been in service for several years without major incident, and her crew was among the most experienced in the Soviet Navy. A simple electrical fault should not have been beyond their ability to control. More troubling theories suggested that the submarine's advanced design might have contained inherent flaws that made fire suppression more difficult than anticipated. The titanium hull that allowed the Komsomolets to dive so deep might have conducted heat in ways that spread the fire faster than conventional steel construction. The submarine's compact design, necessary for deep diving operations, might have made it difficult to isolate fires once they started. The most controversial theory involved the possibility of sabotage. The Komsomolets represented one of the Soviet Union's most classified military programs, and there were those who opposed the enormous resources being devoted to such projects. If someone had deliberately caused the fire, it would explain both its rapid spread and the apparent failure of safety systems that should have contained it. But no evidence of sabotage was ever found, and the investigation's conclusions remained largely classified. The exact cause of the fire that destroyed the Komsomolets would remain one of the Soviet Navy's most closely guarded secrets. The environmental implications of the submarine's loss were also cause for concern. The Komsomolets had sunk with her nuclear reactor and 2 nuclear torpedoes still aboard, creating an underwater radioactive hazard that would persist for decades. The Norwegian Sea, already home to several nuclear submarines lost during the Cold War, had gained another source of potential contamination. The loss of the Komsomolets marked the end of Soviet ambitions for ultra-deep diving submarines. The enormous cost of the project, combined with the tragic loss of the vessel and her crew, convinced Soviet planners that such experimental submarines were too risky and expensive to pursue further. The submarine that was supposed to represent the future of underwater warfare had instead become a monument to the limits of technological ambition. For the families of the 42 crew members who died, the disaster was made even more tragic by the secrecy surrounding the investigation. Official explanations were vague and contradictory, leaving many questions about their loved ones' deaths unanswered. The heroic efforts of the crew to save their submarine were overshadowed by the mystery of why those efforts had failed. Today, the K-278 Komsomolets rests on the bottom of the Norwegian Sea, her titanium hull slowly corroding in the frigid depths she was designed to explore. The submarine has become a monument to both technological ambition and its limitations, a reminder that even the most advanced engineering cannot eliminate all risks in the hostile environment of the deep ocean. The mystery of what caused the fire that destroyed the Komsomolets continues to haunt submarine designers and safety experts. The disaster demonstrated that complexity and sophistication do not necessarily equate to safety, and that even the most advanced submarines remain vulnerable to the most basic dangers. In the depths where the Komsomolets rests, the ocean continues its eternal watch over another submarine mystery. The vessel that was designed to probe the deepest secrets of the sea had instead become one of those secrets herself, her story buried beneath layers of classification and speculation that may never be fully penetrated. Story 22. The HMS Truculent Collision Enigma. From the burning depths where the Komsomolets met her technological demise, we return to the familiar waters closer to home, where routine operations and well-traveled shipping lanes should have provided the ultimate in navigational safety. This is the story of a submarine disaster that occurred not in the hostile waters of enemy territory or the crushing depths of the abyss, but in one of the busiest waterways in the world. In the Thames estuary, where countless vessels had safely navigated for centuries, a collision would occur that defied every principle of maritime safety and seamanship. The Thames tragedy. January 12th, 1950. The Thames estuary lay shrouded in the winter darkness, its waters reflecting the lights of one of the world's busiest shipping lanes. This was the maritime highway to London, a waterway so familiar and well-traveled that navigation should have been routine even in the darkest night. Merchant vessels, naval ships, and smaller craft moved through these waters with the confidence born of centuries of safe passage. But on this winter night, the familiar would become fatal in a collision that should never have happened. HMS Truculent was conducting trials in the estuary, testing systems and procedures that would soon make her operational in Britain's post-war submarine fleet. She was a T-class submarine, representing the latest evolution in British underwater warfare technology, designed to incorporate lessons learned during the brutal submarine campaigns of World War II. The trials being conducted that night were considered routine, the kind of systematic testing that all submarines underwent before entering active service. The Thames estuary provided ideal conditions for such trials: familiar waters, well-marked shipping lanes, and proximity to naval facilities that could provide support if needed. But familiarity, as so many submarine disasters have taught us, can be more dangerous than the unknown. The Swedish merchant ship Dechaineux was making her way through the estuary on a routine voyage, following shipping lanes that had been used safely by thousands of vessels. Her crew was experienced in navigating these waters, and her course was predictable and properly marked according to international maritime protocols. It should have been impossible for the two vessels to collide. Yet at approximately 7 p.m., in one of the most heavily trafficked and well-regulated waterways in the world, HMS Truculent and Dechaineux came together in a collision that would claim 64 lives and create one of the most baffling maritime mysteries of the post-war era. The collision occurred as HMS Truculent was surfacing from a test dive, bringing her to the surface in the middle of the busy shipping lane. The submarine's crew should have been aware of surface traffic through their periscope observations and sonar contacts. The merchant ship should have been visible long before any possibility of collision. Yet somehow, neither vessel detected the other until it was too late. The impact was devastating for the submarine. Divina's steel hull tore through Truculent's pressure hull like a knife through paper, causing massive flooding that doomed the submarine almost instantly. The T-class submarine, designed to withstand the pressures of the deep ocean and the explosive force of enemy depth charges, was no match for the crushing impact of a surface collision. HMS Truculent sank in minutes, taking most of her crew with her. The rapid sinking left little time for emergency procedures or evacuation attempts. Despite being in relatively shallow water where escape should have been possible, 64 of the 81 souls aboard perished in the disaster. The speed of the sinking and the high casualty rate made the disaster even more tragic and mysterious. In the shallow waters of the Thames estuary, submarine crews should have been able to escape even from a severely damaged vessel. The submarine's emergency systems should have provided sufficient time for evacuation, and rescue vessels should have been able to reach survivors quickly. Yet the majority of Truculent's crew never made it to the surface. The investigation into the collision revealed a series of failures and oversights that seemed almost impossible to believe. The submarine's crew appeared to have surfaced without properly clearing the area of surface traffic. The merchant ship's crew seemed to have been unaware of the submarine's presence until the moment of impact. Most puzzling of all, neither vessel sent a distress signal before the collision, suggesting that neither crew realized they were in danger until it was too late to prevent disaster. The Royal Navy's inquiry into the collision found evidence of navigational errors and procedural failures, but it struggled to explain how such basic mistakes could have occurred among experienced crews operating in familiar waters. The collision seemed to represent a perfect storm of errors and omissions that individually were minor, but together had created a catastrophic situation. Several factors may have contributed to the disaster, but none provided a complete explanation for how the collision had occurred. The night was dark, which could have limited visibility for both vessels, but both were equipped with lights and radar systems that should have made detection possible. The submarine's surfacing procedure may have been flawed, bringing her to the surface without adequate warning to other vessels in the area. But submarine crews were extensively trained in surface procedures, and the Thames estuary was a well-known area for submarine operations. The merchant ship's navigation may have been compromised by equipment problems or human error, but her crew was experienced and the shipping lanes were clearly marked. There was no obvious reason why Divina should have been unable to detect and avoid a surfacing submarine. One of the most troubling aspects of the investigation was the discovery that the merchant ship's lights were reportedly dimmed at the time of the collision. This could have made Divina less visible to Truculent's crew, but it raised questions about why a merchant vessel would be operating with reduced lighting in a busy shipping lane. The lack of distress signals from either vessel suggested that the collision had occurred without warning for both crews. This meant that whatever had caused the collision had developed so quickly that neither crew had time to recognize the danger and take evasive action. Some investigators suggested that communication failures might have played a role in the disaster. If the submarine's crew had been unable to properly monitor radio traffic, or if the merchant ship had not been maintaining proper radio watch, it could have prevented the vessels from coordinating their movements to avoid collision. Weather conditions on the night of the collision were not ideal, but they were not severe enough to explain such a fundamental navigation failure. The Thames estuary had been successfully navigated by thousands of vessels in far worse conditions, making it difficult to blame the collision on environmental factors. The possibility of equipment failure was also considered, but both vessels appeared to have been mechanically sound at the time of the collision. The submarine's systems were functioning normally during her trials, and the merchant ship showed no signs of the kind of mechanical problems that might have led to navigation difficulties. Perhaps the most unsettling theory was that the collision had been caused by a series of human errors so basic that they seemed almost inconceivable. If both crews had simply failed to follow standard procedures for navigation and collision avoidance, it would explain how the disaster had occurred despite all the safety systems and protocols designed to prevent such incidents. The loss of HMS Truculent sent shockwaves through the Royal Navy and the international maritime community. The collision had occurred in waters that were considered among the safest in the world, involving crews that were experienced and well-trained. If such a disaster could happen in the Thames estuary, it could happen anywhere. The tragedy led to significant changes in submarine operating procedures and maritime traffic control systems. New protocols were implemented to better coordinate submarine operations with surface shipping, and additional safety measures were put in place to prevent similar collisions. But the fundamental mystery of how the collision had occurred remained largely unsolved. The investigation's conclusions pointed to human error and procedural failures, but they could not definitively explain why experienced crews had made such catastrophic mistakes. For the families of the 64 crew members who died, the disaster was made even more tragic by the proximity to safety. Their loved ones had died within sight of shore, in waters where rescue should have been certain and survival assured. The knowledge that the collision might have been prevented by better communication or navigation procedures made their loss even more difficult to bear. HMS Truculent was eventually raised from the Thames estuary and examined in detail, but the physical evidence provided little additional insight into the cause of the collision. The submarine had been destroyed by the impact and subsequent flooding, leaving few clues about what had happened in the moments before the disaster. Today, the Thames estuary continues to be one of the world's busiest waterways, with sophisticated traffic control systems and navigation aids that have made collisions like the Truculent disaster extremely rare. But the memory of that January night in 1950 serves as a sobering reminder that even in the most familiar and well-regulated waters, the potential for catastrophic error remains. The collision between HMS Truculent and Dechaineux stands as a testament to the importance of vigilance and communication in maritime operations. It demonstrates that no amount of experience or technological sophistication can eliminate the need for constant attention to basic safety procedures. In the depths of the Thames estuary, where maritime history stretches back centuries, the story of HMS Truculent serves as a final reminder that the ocean's greatest mysteries often lie not in exotic locations or extreme conditions, but in the everyday operations that we take for granted. Sometimes the most baffling disasters occur not in the hostile depths of enemy waters, but in the familiar channels of home,